Good afternoon, Conference, and welcome to our debate on item F32, which is the first of the two emergency motions we're debating at this conference. I'll just remind you that the other one, on implementing the recommendations of the Grenfell Tower Inquiry Phase 2 report, will be debated tomorrow at 9 a.m, and I'd encourage you to submit cards to speak on it, because we don't have very many at the moment. Now, we're dealing with item F32, the emergency motion on the Israel-Gaza conflict. You'll find a text of it on today's conference daily on pages 5 to 8. I'd ask all speakers to stick very strictly to time. We have far more cards in than we can possibly call, so if everyone's concise, we might be able to squeeze one or two more in. Okay, would Leon Duveen from Bassett Law please stand by? I now call to propose the motion the party's Foreign Affairs spokesperson and MP for Oxford West and Abingdon, Layla Moran.
Thank you, Duncan. Thank you, Conference. This time last year, none of us could have imagined the horror that would be unleashed in Israel and Palestine. While this is not the first time Conference has discussed the conflict, I think it's fair to say that October the 7th, 2023 will be seared in the minds of not just Israelis and Palestinians, but across the world. And I thank our Conference Committee for allowing an emergency motion, given how fast-moving it's appearing to be. At this conference, we've had hostage families engaging with our parliamentarians, every story different, every life reverberating through their community. And we've also spoken with Gazans who've lost generations of their families, and they wonder, even if those who are left don't die, what is going to be left for them afterwards? Hearing all of these stories, I should note, is not a zero-sum game. Every single life is precious. Every life lost is a tragedy. But rather than descend into despair, we Liberal Democrats choose to have hope. And that's why yesterday, I invited my good friend, Magen Inon, to address this auditorium. His parents were murdered by Hamas on October the 7th. And yet, despite this, he has chosen to dedicate his life to peace and a two-state solution. He spoke about his hopes to one day tell his daughter that while we're sorry we couldn't fix Grandma and Grandpa, we were able to make the world a better place for you to grow up in. So, Conference, I must start by leveling with you. The situation in the region is as bleak as I've ever seen it. Every day seems to bring new tensions, new tragedy, new trauma, and it's spreading. We've seen in recent weeks the violence in the West Bank. Settler violence has spiked, and now IDF raids too. And the threat of Iran and the prospect of a wider war. This region is now a tinderbox. Conference, at this moment, we need to wrest control away from those extremes, and that is what we have centered this emergency motion on. That is how we get to that immediate bilateral ceasefire we desperately want to see and go further towards a two-state solution and lasting peace. Now, the UK has a role to play here. We have historic obligations to the region, promises our government made to the people of Palestine, and promises that were reneged on time and time again. Our approach acknowledges this historic responsibility, and we call again in this motion for the immediate recognition of Palestine, just as our allies Norway, Spain, and Ireland have done. But that is also why we stand full square in support of our international institutions, like the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice. And in particular in the motion, we call on the government to respect in full the ICJ advisory opinion on the occupation. We also want a stronger stance on the export of British arms. When there are suspected human rights abuses anywhere in the world, UK arms should not be allowed to be used. And right now, that includes Gaza, but also critically, the West Bank. And that is also why we call for more decisive action on all those who perpetrate or incite violence, like the extremist settler movement, or who export terrorism, like Iran's Revolutionary Guard. Now, I'm about to step down as Foreign Affairs spokesperson, and one of the achievements that I am most proud of is how we as a party have navigated the last few months. I want to say a heartfelt thank you to all of you, but in particular, Liberal Democrat friends of Palestine, Liberal Democrat friends of Israel, and Liberal Democrat friends of peace in the Middle East. Gavin, Monroe, Anne-Marie, Leon, and many more, thank you. Working with you to produce the best possible motion, it's not easy for any of us. But it is testament to our party that yet again we have managed to create something which all of us, no matter which lens we may look through, are united by our core liberal values. And we should feel so proud to have been able to do it. Conference, the Liberal Democrats are clear. The only way through this nightmare is towards a two-state solution based on 1967 borders. And we recognize that only a two-state solution will deliver the security and dignity which Palestinians and Israelis deserve. So, Conference, I urge you, stand with those who want peace, stand up for international law and human rights, vote and support for this motion today. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Would Gavin Stoller from Hertsmere please stand by? I now call to speak in favour of the motion Leon Devine from Bassett Law. Leon is chair of the Lib Dems for Peace in the Middle East.
Conference, this isn't the motion I wanted us to be discussing today. It's got all the normal drawbacks of a motion decided by competing interests and meeting none of them fully. But it is the one we have. And so you might have quibbles about this clause or that phrasing. I feel there could be more said, maybe should be said. But please supporting it is important, as we have to make a statement about where we as a party stand, even though some other parties might struggle with this. As a Jew, as a Zionist, as a former IDF soldier, with family still living in Israel, with friends both there and in Palestine, I want to talk about why it's important to find a just solution for the Arab-Jewish, Israeli-Palestinian conflict which afflicts that small sliver of land. This conflict didn't start in October of last year. It didn't start in June 1967. It didn't even start with the Nakba and the founding of Israel in 1948. We can be traced back to for over 100 years. And in that time, there has been too much violence, too many killed, too many atrocities committed by both sides, for which there can never be full justice. But there is one injustice we must address and must try and deal with. That is the injustice this conflict is doing to the young people in both Palestine and Israel, forcing them to learn to kill and be killed, denying them the future that they deserve by giving them a stunted upbringing full of stories of hatred and the past terrible events, by allowing this conflict to continue, by not helping those working for peace on both sides, by only seeing the conflict from the lens of one side, we are damaging the future of both Palestinians and Israelis. If nothing else, we should agree that, as a party, we must get behind the many groups in both nations who are working for peace, understanding and compromise, to allow all those young people on both sides to flourish and achieve their potential. I would like to end with the chorus of a song written by the members of the Jerusalem Youth Chorus, a choir made up of young people from both sides of Jerusalem, Palestinians and Israelis, Jews, Muslims and Christians, a song that talks about their experience and the future they face. When the day is done what will be left behind? Only you and me, and our futures intertwined. We live within the walls, we feel each other's pain. Because of you, I know you must choose a different way. Conference, it is time to help Palestine and Israel's young people. It is time to help both nations choose that different way.
Thank you, Leon. Would Anne-Marie Simpson from Didcot and Wantage please stand by? I now call Gavin Stoller from Hartsmere. Gavin is chair of Lib Dem Friends of Israel.
Conference. I'm the honorary chairman of the Liberal Democrat Friends of Israel. LDFI believes passionately in the hope of a two-state solution, or in other words, where Israel, the sovereign nation-state for the Jewish people, exists alongside a newly created sovereign state of Palestine. That belief is shared by our Liberal Democrat Party. Anyone who shares our belief in a two-state solution is a Zionist. For Zionism is the belief in a sovereign state of Israel, a homeland for the Jewish people, a state like any other in the world, which has a right to exist and defend itself from attack, invasion, without question. This motion centres both on the plight of the hostages together with the plight of the civilians in Gaza who have been injured or killed in this war. There is also important condemnation, as Layla said, for the role of Iran and her proxies, the Houthis, Hezbollah, as well as Hamas, who continue to actively attack Israel. This motion shows empathy, care, and consideration for the suffering, displacement, fear, and loss on both sides. I'll quote Rachel Goldberg-Polin, the mother of Hirsch, a young American-Israeli hostage recently executed by Hamas. She said, "In a competition of pain, there are no winners." So what next? Whilst our hope may be for a two-state solution, what will make that actually possible? The solution only becomes possible when there is no more war. I think we all realise that no more war won't be achieved by agreeing a ceasefire which leaves any hostages remaining, or a ceasefire which provides no prospect for a different future. No more war also won't be achieved where children on one side are being brought up and educated in their schools to hate or are being financially incentivised to kill those on the other side of the border. No more war can't be achieved whilst any extremes are in power on either side. Today's motion is therefore a start, but it isn't the end. The end is one of peaceful coexistence, one where both sides truly want their own state and sovereignty, and where both sides truly want and will do what is necessary to ensure peace for current and future generations. There is much work, therefore, to be done, and it must come from within. Lib Dems are natural centrists. It's from the centre that all sides can work together to protect and ensure a safe and secure future for everyone. We have to believe peace is possible. I certainly do. Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin. Would Peter Price from Cardiff and Vale please stand by? And now called to speak in favour of the motion, Anne-Marie Simpson from Didcot and Wantage. Anne-Marie is chair of Lib Dem Friends of Palestine.
Hello, Conference. I'm going to ask you to look past the numbers written down, the 40,000 plus Palestinians killed, the 1,100 plus killed in the 7th of October attacks, the 100 plus hostages, and see a person you know. For some of you, this is painfully real. I'm sorry. Think of your son, your daughter, your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, your grandmother, grandfather, cousin, your aunt, your uncle, your friend, your neighbour, your work colleagues, your schoolmates, gone suddenly, tragically, brutally, tearing your heart, mind and soul apart. The apocalyptic scenes coming out every day from Gaza, the escalating violent images and destruction from the illegally occupied West Bank, the hostage families demonstrating in the streets of Israel can leave us in no doubt that we need an immediate bilateral ceasefire. We needed it over 11 months ago. For Gaza, this cannot come soon enough, with over 2 million people displaced and 0 safe zones. Nobody who heard it can forget the frightened young voice of 6-year-old Hind Rajab, trapped in a car with her dead relatives, pleading to be rescued in an over 3-hour phone call to the Red Crescent before she too was killed. The Liberal Democrat Party should call on Israel to lift the ban on foreign journalists accessing the Gaza Strip. Until the media has access, it should be assumed that Israel has acts it wishes to hide, which means the conduct of genocide is all the more plausible. The role of Iran is destabilizing the region. The role of Iran in destabilizing the region is noted. We should also call out Netanyahu for actively working to prevent peace and for his government's role in destabilizing the region. If Netanyahu abandoned the belief that Jerusalem is exclusively the eternal and indivisible capital of Israel and that Judea and Samaria are part of Israel and instead recognized the Palestinian people and their inalienable right to self-determination, the world would come together to construct the two-state solution based on the rights of each party under international law. Iran would then find itself completely isolated. The Israeli government's words and deeds have led to a marked increase in settler violence against Palestinians, which goes unchecked by the IDF. So I welcome the call on government to uphold international law and international courts, ban trade with illegal settlements, and bring sanctions against anyone in the settler movement that uses or incites violence. The motion calls on government to end the use of arbitrary administrative detention of Palestinians by the IDF, where prisoners are held without charge on trial. However, it fails to mention the systematic torture of Palestinian prisoners, particularly under this policy, including sexual violence and rape. Israeli politicians have explicitly defended and justified this. This goes well beyond legitimate political differences and is not something we can or should tolerate from a state we call a friend and ally. These human rights violations have been well documented by NGOs, and most recently in Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem's report, Welcome to Hell. It is right to call for the immediate recognition of the state of Palestine and press for a two-state solution. We have long understood, as the International Court of Justice has confirmed, that the occupation of Palestinian territories is illegal, not just immoral. Israeli and Palestinians alike deserve peace, equality, and justice, including an end to the occupation. It's time for the Palestinian people to be recognized and treated as equal human beings and not just numbers. Please support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would Jonathan Gale from West Hertfordshire please stand by? I now call to speak in favour of the motion Peter Price from Cardiff and Vale.
Imagine that you're standing at the end of the bed of an 8-year-old child who's had her left leg amputated. It's not just her. 1,000 Palestinian children have had limbs amputated. Both her parents were killed in an Israeli attack. Not only hers, but thousands of children have lost their parents. Over 40,000 Palestinians have been killed, the majority of whom are women and children. The start of this massive escalation was, of course, the Hamas attack on the 7th of October, 1,100 Israelis killed in a day of senseless brutality, and hostages taken, 100 of whom are still being held. In response, Israel has not merely identified and attacked Hamas, it has launched vengeance on all Palestinians in Gaza and some on the West Bank, on a scale condemned in international law. And this is not being done with the support of the families of the 7th of October victims. They recognize that the path to peace is through cessation of violence and then a series of steps forward. This motion sets out the issues and some of the first steps which need to be taken. The present reality is that Israel feels that it can act with impunity to achieve greater dominance over Palestinians. American weapons and diplomatic support and continued supply of most weapons its supply of weapons are the main reasons. But the United Kingdom has also given diplomatic support and continues most weapons supplies. Unless all the steps taken in this set out in this motion are taken, and speedily, with more to come, we will see many more limbless children, many more parentless children, yet more destruction of homes, schools, and civil infrastructure to make the restoration of normal lives impossible for a whole generation. Israel must find the cost of continuing too great, that it can't get away with it. The world must act now to give hope where at the present there is none.
Thank you, Peter. Would Ruvi Ziegler from Oxford East please stand by? I now call to speak against parts of the motion Jonathan Gale from West Hertfordshire.
The recent elections in Germany, some have described as perhaps a decline in liberal democracy with the rise of the far right. The World Democracy Index has reduced. The number of democracies in the world over the last 20 years has reduced. Russia has been emboldened to invade a democracy on our doorstep. I joined the Liberal Democrats after Brexit. This was the party that was not chasing after slogans like take back control, sovereignty, and exaggerated claims which played to emotions. In this current conflict, it's been marked by new slogans and buzzwords. Israel equals apartheid. Israel is committing war crimes, ethnic cleansing. Now, if we start out with these words, we will end up with a conclusion based on prejudice. And I'm asking conference not to go down the route which the party did not follow in 2016. These words, war crimes, were repeated while avoiding the facts which do not fit the narrative. War is awful. There is no modern war where children are not killed and maimed. It's a tragic fact of modern life, and I would certainly support a motion to stop war and abolish war. But if one is genocidal, why warn people before bombing? Why beg civilians by text to leave in advance of bombing in the area? 750,000 people were displaced when Israel was founded in 1948. There are now over 5 million Palestinian Arabs descended from them. That refugee population has been preserved down the generations like no other. Some genocide. Many Arabs did not leave the area in 1948. Their descendants have more rights than their compatriots anywhere else in the region. They're free to practice any religion, print what they want in the press. They're Supreme Court judges and members of Parliament. They can be gay, straight, bi, or trans. Israel is a liberal democracy. We don't like the government, but that's democracy. Israel is facing its darkest hour. At the moment, it's fighting Iran and its proxies. We need to look to our unconscious bias and stop telling the Palestinians what they want, but listen to the words of Israel's enemies. October the 7th was called the Al-Aqsa Flood, and it was named after the traditional Islamic name for Jerusalem. That carnival of rape and torture was on its own terms nothing other than a holy war. This is not a dispute about land. If it were, it would have been resolved by now. It is about ideology. Israel is at war for survival. If you disarm Israel, there'll be no more Israel. Recognition of a Palestinian state, October 7th proved exactly why that would be foolish, even more so.
Please draw your remarks to a close.
Sorry.
You have to finish now. Sorry.
We can't I have to finish.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm sorry about that. People have to stick very strictly to time. Would Claire Cape from Chippenham please stand by? Now called to speak in favour of the motion, Dr. Ruby Ziegler from Oxford East.
Good afternoon, Conference. In line 63 to 74, the motion calls on the UK to respect in full the ICJ advisory. As an international lawyer, I want to explain why this is not just a political choice, but a legal requirement. In short, why the word advisory is deceiving. What the ICJ has done is actually an authoritative statement of the position in international law. The ICJ found that Israel is under an obligation to cease immediately all settlement activity and to evacuate all settlers from the occupied Palestinian territory. It also found that Israel's continued presence in the OPT is unlawful and that it is under an obligation to bring its presence to an end as rapidly as possible. What were the reasons for this? Violations of two key principles of international law. The first, the acquisition of territory by force, and the second, the right of all peoples, including the Palestinian people, to self-determination. And at the core of that violation stands the settlement project. Because what the settlement project has done is to cement Israel's presence and effectively to render the occupation's temporariness a facade. It also created a discriminatory regime where you've got two populations, Israelis and Palestinians, living in the same territory under different legal regimes. Now, what are the obligations arising from this? And these are unequivocal obligations on all countries, including the UK. They are not to render aid or assistance in maintaining the situation that is created by Israel's continued presence in the OPT. This is a groundbreaking opinion. It's ripping the mask of temporality. It identifies settlement as its core problem, and it highlights the critical role of the international community and its individual members. So what should we do? In fact, what must we do? Well, the obvious example is the ban on settlement products that in fact is party policy since 2021. This is arguably now a legal requirement, not a political choice. And ultimately, given Israel under its current leadership is in all likelihood going to persist in its unlawful presence in the OPT rather than end it, as the ICJ requires, all other UN member states, including this one, must take measures to compel it to bring the settlement project to an immediate halt and to chart a course to the termination of occupation through a two-state solution. The UK must demonstrate its commitment to the rule of international law, and that starts with complying with its obligations arising from this opinion. This motion is a good start. Please support it.
Thank you, Ruby. Would Imad Ahmed from Bradford City please stand by? And now called to speak against the motion, Claire Cape from Chippenham.
Conference, thank you for listening to me. I want to start by thanking Layla and her team for putting together this important and timely motion and your powerful opening remarks, and in fact the powerful remarks from many of the speakers I've heard so far. I am speaking against the motion on the basis that it is weak. It does not go far enough in recognising the injustices being experienced by Palestinians in both Gaza and the West Bank. These have been widely described as genocidal war crimes carried out by the ultra-right-wing Israeli government for IDF and violent settlers in the illegally occupied West Bank. The Lib Dems have an opportunity, which we must take now, to address the findings of Janice Turner's review of the Dodds report 6 years on. That's here, it was launched last night for anyone that was in that session. And I would draw people's attention to page 17, which says the lack of sufficient engagement with ethnic minority communities, particularly at a time when many who felt betrayed by Labour policies on Gaza would have welcomed a Lib Dem policy, resulted in the votes moving away from Labour, mostly transferring to other parties. We have an opportunity to be much stronger in our narrative around the Palestinian question, if you like. My view is that the motion is still not strong enough on international law, and we've heard from Ruvi and others about that. International law applies to Israel, and the International Court of Justice findings need to be very clearly expressed. My reservations about the motion refer specifically to line 9, which omits to mention the huge number of Palestinian prisoners that still prisoners. Line 40 omits the need for immediate recognition of Palestine as a prerequisite for a two-state solution. Line 56 should include mention of the need for a functioning healthcare system in Gaza. Hospitals are currently unable to function, and line 94 would benefit from a comment about the need for more democratic leadership in the Israeli government. Having made these criticisms of the motion, I will, on reflection, likely support it, although I'm going to listen to everyone else. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Would Lawrence Brass from Hertsmere please stand by? I now call to speak in favour of the motion Imad Ahmed from Bradford City.
Hello, Conference. While the Liberal Democrat Friends of Palestine and Bradford West broadly support this motion, we note that it has several weaknesses. The motion omits the mention of Israeli torture of prisoners. It omits the destabilizing role that the USA plays in the region. It omits the need to allow the international media to return to Gaza. And it also calls for engagement with Yesh Atid, which, although is an observer member of Liberal International, evidently does not share our liberal values. First, omission of torture against Palestinians and Palestinian prisoners. The motion omits the systematic torture of some 1,200 Palestinian prisoners. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have documented this, particularly under the policy of administrative detention, which precludes the charges being made or fair trials being held. The omission reflects a lack of balance in this motion. The inclusion of Iran, if we are going to mention Iran and its destabilizing effects in the region, we must also mention the USA's unconditional support to Israel. In terms of engagement with Yesh Atid, they have been supporting military actions in Gaza. They have not been showing the opposition that they ought to from the start. Their leader, Yair Lapid, presided over the deadliest escalation in violence since 2006 in the West Bank during his 6-month prime ministership in 2022. So while we may consider engaging Yesh Atid, we should also be questioning their observer status in the Liberal International. They do not share our liberal values. Finally, Israel must allow international media to come to Gaza. Any country which bans war correspondence has something to hide. This party must call for that ban to end. These are the motion's weaknesses. We note them, but we do support another resolution that calls for the immediate and unconditional recognition of Palestine, which upholds international law and which calls for an end to arms exports to Israel. Thank you.
Thank you, Imad. Would Christine Jardine from Edinburgh West please stand by? And now call to speak against parts of the motion Lawrence Brass from Hertsmere.
Conference, I shouldn't really be here today. I usually spend September at my home in Israel. But of course, the nightmare of October 7th has changed everything. In fact, I've now given over my home to a young family from Nahariya up near the Lebanese border who couldn't cope with the constant missiles being slammed into their homes by Hezbollah and whose children had spent months scampering in and out of shelters. I'd also wanted to be there to comfort my neighbor, whose cousin was taken hostage when he went to a music festival last year and who's now locked in a cage somewhere in an awful airless tunnel in Gaza, if he's still alive. And I'd have been joining my other neighbors in demonstrating against the government of Netanyahu, a man for whom I have nothing, I assure you, but contempt. And of course, I weep at every single loss of Palestinian life. But I'm glad that this motion at least recognizes the thousands of displaced Israeli citizens and the 101 hostages of several different faiths who were cruelly being held captive. But had I been in Israel, I'd also been spending time in a small village, situated between Israel and Jerusalem, known in Hebrew as Neve Shalom and in Arabic as Wahat al-Salam, and it means oasis of peace. And last year I succeeded the former British ambassador to Israel as chairman of the British Friends. It's a quite extraordinary and inspiring place where the ethos of coexistence has become a reality. There are 300 homes divided exactly half and half between Arab and Jewish families. There's an amazing primary school, also divided strictly 50-50. Every textbook is written in both Hebrew and Arabic. Every lesson is bilingual. The children learn to respect each other's culture and refuse to be divided into tribes. The village residents and our children are living proof that peace can be achieved without sacrificing patriotism and nationalism. I'm pleased that this motion recognizes the importance of working with what it calls peace builders. I hope that that would include those in my village. So you'll see, conference, there is an alternative way forward towards a situation grounded in dialogue and trust. I'm returning to the village soon, and I hope I can tell them that the Liberal Democrat Conference supports what they're trying to achieve and wishes them well.
Thank you, Lawrence. Would Hina Bakari from Merton Borough please stand by? Now called to speak in favour of the motion, the party's Women and Equality spokesperson and MP for Edinburgh West, Christine Jardine.
Thank you, conference. I know exactly where I was. I was in a taxi on my way to Edinburgh Airport, Glasgow Airport actually, on October the 7th to fly to Spain for a family wedding when the first reports came through of the attack, the Hamas attack in Israel. My heart sank. I've been to Israel several times. I've been to the West Bank. I've seen the best of both communities, and I've seen some of the worst of both communities. And I had a horrible feeling about what was to come. But in those first few moments, I thought about having driven to Tea in the Park to pick my daughter up from a music festival. And I thought about those parents who would never be able to pick up their children from the music festival. I thought about being in Israel and actually travelling past the road sign to the site where the music festival was and thinking, that's an unusual way to spell it, but that's like the place in France as well. And it was there in my mind. And I thought most of all about a few months earlier when I'd been at a Jewish school in North London, where they'd had a drill, an alarm, and the children there had talked us, adults, as MPs, through what to do and explained that they have these drills in case there's an intruder. And I knew in my heart of hearts that what was to come in the Middle East was going to be worse than anything we have seen in my lifetime. But I'm grateful that when we returned to Parliament, we had Leila to guide us through it, to guide us through what has been, if you'll pardon the expression in this context, a minefield, a political minefield. There is no right stance on this conflict, and there is no wrong stance on this conflict. We all hate what is happening in Gaza. We all hate what happened on October the 7th. And more than anything else, we all want a solution. And now Leila has brought this motion to us, which sets out in detail the route that we have travelled, that we were the first people to call for an immediate bilateral ceasefire, humanitarian aid, the release of the hostages, and that Hamas should have no future in a two-state solution. And I agree with Gavin. Israel is about the people of Israel having a right to a place to live. But, conference, the Palestinian people have a right to a place to live that is theirs and self-determination. Palestinians haven't been treated like any other people, and I don't mean by Israel, I mean by all of us in the international community. To an outsider, it feels like they have been pawns in the geopolitical chess game that is the Middle East for 70 years, and nobody has taken their side. The first time I visited Israel, it was a tourist. The last time, I went to a refugee camp in Bethlehem, where I met refugees and brought home some jewellery made from a tear gas canister.
Please draw your remarks to a close.
To me, it represents both sides, and why for both sides we need that two-state solution.
Thank you, Christine. Would Jeremy Purvis please stand by to summate the motion? And I'll call to speak in favour of the motion Hina Bakari from Merton Borough, and of course one of the party's members of the Greater London Assembly.
And this is not going to be easy. My family lost 50 in Gaza, 50 members. And I could list their names, but it would take too long. And I know lots of families have lost many numbers like that, 50, more than that. On October the 7th, I messaged my Auntie Roy. All her family are in Israel. And Auntie Roy's my dad's best friend. She's Jewish, my dad Muslim. They met in London as teachers. I said, "Are you okay?" I'm terrified. I'm deeply traumatized. As the attacks in Palestine escalated, she said, "I pray for peace and security for all." And she added, "I detest Netanyahu. I blame him. We must uphold international law," she said, "and I pray for a ceasefire." It doesn't matter what religion you are or where you live, we all want peace. And as Layla says, we are all on that side for peace. In London, the city that I represent, there are over 1 million Muslims, and 2/3 of all Jews actually live in that city. So it comes as no surprise that the impact of what's happening in Gaza is so prevalent there. And the city has seen both anti-Semitic and Islamophobia rise continually. And the motion applauds the work of those who are bringing communities together. But as a founder of interfaith charities, I have to say, we really haven't done enough, which is why I fully support our party's position to have an independent advisor on Islamophobia and to have an accepted definition of Islamophobia. Please, let's all work on that. Faith leaders need to feel they have a safe space to speak and to have difficult conversations. And that is the only way we will really, truly succeed in making sure there is no more hate. We also need to have honest conversations that include the government. Why is it that David Lammy still has not published the advice on Israeli arms sales? So we must demand transparency from our government. I am incredibly proud of our party, the first party to call for a bilateral ceasefire. And we must continue to fight for that and stop this awful war.
Thank you very much, Hina. After the next speaker, we'll be moving to the vote, so get your voting cards ready, and the online voting will be opening. So I now call to summate on the motion Jeremy Purvis from Midlothian, Tweedale and Lauderdale, and of course a member of our group in the House of Lords. Jeremy.
Hina, following you is a perfect example of how it's impossible to give justice to this complex issue in the short period of time that we've debated it today. And indeed, I will not be able to give justice to the contributions that you've heard this afternoon. But I would also appeal for all members to look at the totality of what we've been saying, both in the House of Lords and the House of Commons over the last year. I speak for the party on foreign affairs in the House of Lords, and it's been a real privilege for me to be the colleague of Layla over the last year, a very difficult year. But we've also been supported by members of our Liberal family, especially in the House of Lords, for Munro Palmer and Meryl Hussein-Etchi, because we've been blessed with having the presidents of both LDFI and LDFP as colleagues of mine, and they've been supportive, but they've helped us to take principled and practical positions. And Jonathan, you're absolutely right. We have refused to sloganize. In 1980, David Steele led a Liberal delegation to the Middle East, and he met the region's leaders. One of the conclusions of the report of that party commission was for the recognition of the state of Palestine on the 1967 borders, and we've had a consistent position of that for the last 45 years. Indeed, Baroness Northover has introduced a bill to that effect in the House of Lords last week. But I agree with Gavin that that will only succeed if there is a safe, secure, and prosperous state of Israel. There should also, however, be no impunity for those acts of terrorism, but also for the violence in the West Bank, which is a tinderbox, as Leila said. We need the respect of international humanitarian law, and it was the Liberal Democrats who were the first to call out those who are operating in illegal outposts and for the violence that they've inflicted on the Palestinian community. It was the first for us to call for the suspension of export licenses. We were the first party to call for the full respect of the international courts, and only last week we were the only party to call for Red Cross access both for the hostages' families as well, Claire, as for those Palestinian prisoners. On a visit earlier this year, Leila and I saw the worst of what humans can do to other humans, but we also saw the best of humanity. Gavin mentioned Rachel Goldberg-Polin. I met with her, and it is right. She said that there is no competition of pain and tears, just a lot of pain and tears. And she said that she felt affinity with Palestinian mothers. So those remaining hostages need to be released, and the suffering of the Palestinians in Gaza needs to come to an end. And we have had principled, practical, serious proposals to do exactly that, and we will continue to be constructive and practical in our opposition in both Houses of Parliament on this government. Let me close with what Leon asked us to think about with a new generation, who've been horribly scarred by the conflict, but as Peter said, we are also seeing the suffering of unbearable weight of history on our young people. But we also heard that coexistence is not only possible, but necessary. This is enormous work, but I hope, colleagues, you've seen how we've approached this issue over the last year. We will continue to do it in the same manner, and as we did since 1980, we will play our role.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Thank you to all the speakers, and I'm really sorry we couldn't call more. There were a lot of other cards in wanting to make very good points, but we didn't have time. We're now moving to the vote, so can I see all those voting in favour of motion F32? Thank you very much. Can I now see all those voting against F32? Don't think I can see anybody. There's one. There is one. There are a few. The motion is overwhelmingly carried. Thank you very much, conference. Thanks to my aide, Nick Da Costa, and my hall aide, Shafat Mohammed, and now hand over to Daryl Smalley to chair the next session.
As we are running slightly behind schedule, could I ask those leaving the hall to do so as quickly and quietly as possible? Thank you. We're keen to start F33 as soon as possible. Can I ask those leaving the hall to do so as quickly and quietly as possible? Can those standing please take a seat or leave the hall as soon as possible? Good afternoon, Conference, and welcome to Policy F33, Tackling the Prisons Crisis. There are 3 amendments to F33, and we have accepted a request to have a separate vote. You'll find the text of these amendments and the request for the separate vote in today's Conference Daily on pages 8 to 10. Can I now call Baroness Laurelie Burt to stand by, and I call Josh Babarindi MP to propose the motion.
Conference, this afternoon we'll be debating one of the many messes that the new government has inherited from the Conservatives, the dire state of our prison system. Years of Conservative neglect and mismanagement have plunged England and Wales prisons into crisis. They've become overcrowded, understaffed, and are struggling to sustainably rehabilitate ex-offenders. Our prisons are bursting at the seams, with some of the latest figures showing that there are just 100 spaces left in men's prisons across the whole country. This is not to mention the appalling conditions in the prison estate itself, unacceptable rates of violence and self-harm, overfilled cells, burnt-out staff who are doing their level best to uphold our criminal justice system but are being failed too. The result of this perfect storm, Conference? One of the highest reoffending rates in Europe. Over a third of ex-offenders commit another crime within their first year of leaving prison. And against this backdrop, the government has said it's felt forced into taking emergency measures to ease prison overcrowding this summer, like the early release scheme. And the problem with this, you only got to listen to the president of the Prisoners' Government Association to hear, who said that the government will be lucky to get 12 months before prisons are full again. In no way, shape or form can a system that breeds a state of affairs like this can be described as being tough on crime. A justice system that tolerates more reoffending, more victims, and more lives ruined on this industrial scale is no justice system at all. To be tough on crime is to be bold enough to follow the data to protect victims, and better yet, to prevent even more people from becoming victims of crime in the first place. Spelled out in a motion today, Liberal Democrats have a plan to do just that. It's a plan that puts the protection of victims and the prevention of victimhood at the heart of our criminal justice system. And at the heart of this is rehabilitation. This rehabilitation work can take lots of different forms, many of which are outlined in the motion today. From improving work opportunities and education in prisons to ensuring every prison has a through-the-gate mentoring program that provides one-to-one support in that crucial transition period back into society. And in my former life, running an organisation supporting young people out of crime and out of gangs, I saw the power of this approach to rehabilitation. I personally trained and employed ex-offenders to repair broken smartphone screens and took them into the big skyscrapers of the city and Canary Wharf to make money so that they could feel valued, so that they could belong, so that they could be brought back into the core of society rather than left at the re-offending margins. You can also look at organisations like Switchback or Trailblazers that run such mentoring programmes with lower reoffending rates than the national average. Now, this motion, it also discusses implementing a presumption against short sentences to facilitate rehabilitation in the community. Why? Because the MOJ's own data shows us that short sentences are failing many victims. MOJ figures from 2021, for example, found that a significantly higher proportion of adults released from a custodial sentence of less than 12 months reoffended compared to those who were starting a community or a suspended sentence. Now, of course, the state of our prisons isn't the only mess of this last government's making, we can't forget about the backlog in our criminal courts that is failing victims too. And it's having a direct impact on prison overcrowding. Remand populations where defendants are held in prison while they await trial or sentencing are held at record highs, reaching 16,458 people as of March of this year, making up nearly 20% of the overall prison population. And people are only meant to be held on remand for up to 6 months at a time. But with the number of Crown Court cases with 2-year waits increasing tenfold since 2019, the reality is that people are likely to be held for much longer. So, Conference, I'm glad this motion touches on the Lib Dem plan to finally tackle the backlog in criminal courts, including by prioritising case hearings where the defendant is already on remand. The prisons crisis can't be solved in a vacuum, though, and this is exactly the sort of complementary work needed to bring forward a long-term solution. So, Conference, it won't be easy, but change is clearly needed here. And this government cannot just continue like the Tories did with a sticking plaster approach. The only way to end the prisons crisis once and for all is to reduce reoffending, something that is in everybody's best interests. And the only way to deliver a liberal but genuinely tough criminal justice system is to put victims, reducing reoffending, and rehabilitation at its heart. I've seen it myself. I've done it myself. We must pursue this approach. So, Conference, please support this motion and the amendments that come with it today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josh. I now call Dr. Moshin Khan to stand by and call Baroness Laurelie Burt to speak. And Baroness Laurelie Burt is moving Amendment 1.
My friends, I welcome all of this motion as it stands, but I also want to raise the plight of a group of individuals who deserve special attention. Because if the situation of prisoners today is grim, and Josh has done a great job in explaining just how bad it is, those sentenced to indeterminate imprisonment for public protection, IPPs, is worse. Has anyone read the book or seen the film Catch-22, where our hero, an American fighter pilot in the Second World War, finds himself in a situation where the target number of missions that he's got to complete before being allowed to stop having to risk his life keeps on growing. So he has to keep on fighting, basically, until he carks it. This is how it feels for the unfortunates given IPP sentences. Originally intended for those found guilty of serious offences, people found guilty of offences warranting as little as 18 months have been given indeterminate sentences and are still in prison today, at least 12 years later. The catch-22 bit is they have to prove that they are safe to be released. And how do you do that? Well, you have to complete a certain number of preparatory courses, as well as keeping out of trouble. But you may have to wait years to access each course. Then, when you do get released, you have to keep your nose completely clean for years until you're eligible for final release from licence. And if you commit even a minor infringement of your licence because your head's been messed up for years of incarceration, you'll be whipped back into prison and the whole merry-go-round will start all over again. The uncertainty of when IPPs will finally get out is literally killing them. The UN Special Rapporteur on Torture has called for an urgent review because they've ruled that the psychological effect of the uncertainty of knowing when or whenever they will ever be released constitutes cruel and unusual torture. It's demeaning. And the British Psychological Society says the IPP sentence engenders a sense of anxiety, depression, and hopelessness. IPP rates of self-harm are 2.5 times that of the rest of the prison estate, and that's bad enough. The plight of the IPPs was reviewed very recently by the Justice Select Committee. They recommended a review followed by a resentencing exercise. My friends, we abolished the IPP sentence in 2012, and the sky hasn't fallen in. But if we resentence the remaining rump of IPPs, it would answer that one question that literally kills them. When will I be released? That, my friends, is the amendment that I ask you to pass today.
Thank you, Laurelie. Can I ask John Bridges to stand by? And I now call Dr. Mohsin Khan, who is a member of Federal Policy Committee and chair of Lib Dem Campaign for Racial Equality.
Conference. I back the motion. I'm grateful to the authors for tackling this crucial Liberal issue. And it's fantastic to see Josh on the green benches finally. My amendment just addresses a small area many of us never consider, but can have a devastating effect on well-being, mental health, and physical safety for some prisoners. Reducing involuntary cell sharing. Now imagine, you're awaiting trial for a serious crime. You're innocent until proven guilty. You're in a prison that's also housing guilty sentenced prisoners. Now, guilty sentenced prisoners have fewer privileges than those who are innocent, because we recognise that on remand, you're treated differently to acknowledge your different status. So you're in your cell. Someone you've never met, no idea what they've done, comes into your room. You're told you're sharing with them. They'll bunk on top of you. They might snore if you're lucky. They might scream. They might abuse you or insult you all night. Maybe they're unwell. It's not their fault. Maybe they're terrified or aggressive. You don't know. There might be a curtain supporting a shared toilet that you both use in the cell. Last year, 5 prisons didn't have cells with working toilets in them. Instead, each morning, a prisoner would have to empty out the bucket of human waste. Imagine sharing a room overnight like that. How would your sleep be? How would your mental health be? How would your recovery be? It doesn't take a psychiatrist like me to tell you this is inhumane and not helpful for welfare. And this is the 21st century today. Research shows that dignity goes down, that autonomy of prisoners goes down. Hygiene obviously goes down with cell sharing. Now, in the amendment, I'm not saying that those who are sentenced and guilty should also be protected from this. It's going to take time to fix this after years of underinvestment and overcrowding by the Tories. So that's why the amendment pragmatically prioritises those who are innocent and awaiting trial first by saying this should still be for all. Now, some prisoners like or need sharing for welfare or other reasons. That's okay. This amendment just stops it being forced if you don't want it. Several prisons in the Victorian era were built with single occupancy in mind. Today, overall, roughly 30,000 English prisoners have to share cells. 1/3 of them do so in cells that are not designed for this. In a way, we've gone backwards almost before the Victorians. This can't be the case in the 21st century. Please back the amendment and the excellent motion. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for moving Amendment 2. I ask Jack Bell to stand by and call John Bridges from Manchester, who is moving Amendment 3.
Conference. Fellow Liberals, Amendment 3 adds a new resolution to the motion to develop and expand restorative justice schemes as an effective alternative to short custodial sentences. I've lived in Manchester for 40 years and represented communities that have had to face the corrosive impact of crime, whether it's the horrific Moors murders or the very serious day-to-day impacts of antisocial behaviour and spiralling insurance costs. Crime is all around us and it impacts disproportionately on our poorest communities. Restorative justice is a tool that helps victims engage in the justice process. It is an option that should be clearly available and resourced as part of our justice system. And you'll not be surprised, Conference, that Liberal Democrats have long supported the principles of restorative justice. It's been in our manifestos and policy papers for many years. And again, it was in our 2024 manifesto. We committed to improving access to the restorative justice services. So what is restorative justice? Restorative justice allows the victim to be heard and have a say in the resolution of the offence. It also makes offenders face the consequences of their actions. Restorative justice can be facilitated in a number of ways, including a structured face-to-face meeting involving a facilitator, the offender, and the victim and their supporters, usually family members, professionals such as social workers, and representatives of the wider community may also be involved. Such meetings might well conclude with an agreement for further steps to be taken, e.g. some sort of reparation. Contact between the victim and offender involving a mediator or facilitator is another option, which sometimes involves discussion of the offending. This contact might result in an agreement for further steps to be taken. And a third option is a community conference involving members of the community which have been affected by a particular crime. And this is facilitated in the same ways as the others, but it differs that it involves more people. The importance of this is that it's an option. It's not compulsory, and that it should be offered to all victims as part of the Victims' Code. But its provision in England and Wales is patchy, and in Scotland, though promised by the SNP, it has, surprise, surprise, not been delivered. It's not a replacement for custodial sentences, but research shows that it reduces reoffending by as much as 14%, and hence is a valuable tool in reducing our excessive prison population. Justice needs to change behaviours, not reinforce them. It needs to be an adequately resourced option for victims. Please support this amendment and reaffirm our existing commitments and strengthen this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Can I ask Sally Burnell to stand by? And I now call Jack Bell from Edinburgh North, East and Leith to speak. Jack is speaking against the motion as a whole.
Conference. There are no easy solutions for crime and punishment. I fully sympathise with Keir Starmer having to take the difficult decision to release thousands of prisoners, some of them potentially dangerous, early because of the mess the last government left us in. But ideally, we should build more prisons and possibly expand existing ones so we are not in the position where all the prisons are full and some serious offenders either avoid prison or get lenient sentences. What we don't want to do as a party is give the impression that we are soft on crime. It is all well talking about rehabilitation, but we should not forget the punishment side as well. We need to give the message, if you hurt society, you will face a punishment. I believe that there should be no early releases, and we should work to get into a position where we're not forced to because the prisons are full. Because what message does that send out to victims of crime and communities affected by crime? Early releases are ridiculous. All prisoners should serve exactly what the judge set out in the sentence. If the judge says 10 years, they should serve 10 years, not out in 7, 3 years on licence, unless that's what the judge said at sentencing. Also, to tackle the causes of crime, we need to get into a position where age is not a shield. In Scotland, the SNP has taken a decision which suggests that if you're under 25, you're not fully responsible for crime. That is ridiculous. You should face punishment. Doesn't matter what age you are. Age appropriate, of course. When I was in school and faced a lot of bullying and antisocial behaviour out of school, I heard some advice from a police officer which I did not want to hear, and thankfully I did not take that advice. He said, as before your 16th birthday, if you're going to hit them back before you're 16, and then there's nothing we can do because you're underage. That is ridiculous. If young offenders do not face any consequences before they're adults, then inevitably they're going to have the impression that they cannot be touched, and then they'll end up in prison as adults because they did not count on what the consequences would be. We need to go back to the drawing board, get a long-term position to be tough on crime and focus on punishment as well as rehabilitation. Rehabilitation alone is not good enough. They need to learn their lesson. Thank you, and oppose this motion.
Thank you, Jack. Can I ask Liz Adams to stand by? And I now call Sally Burnell to speak in favour of the motion. Sally is a member of Federal Policy Committee.
Thanks, Gerald. Conference. The prison crisis is an absolute scandal, and the Tories' claim to be the party of law and order is well and truly over. But it's actually nothing new. Prisons have been in a perma-crisis for decades, because no government, Tory or Labour, sees any value in the people in prisons or in the people who work in the criminal justice system. I've even heard it said this weekend that there are no votes in prisons policy. So is this a good prisons policy? I do think it's a start, and I think the amendments are excellent. But you could be forgiven for reading this motion and thinking that it was all the Conservatives' fault. That's only half the story. Under the last Labour government, prisons came within just 21 places of official capacity, and just like now, needed emergency measures. Under the last Labour government, I was a volunteer visitor in HMP Brixton. Every week, I met men who were absolutely desperate for human interaction because they had little or no meaningful work to do or activities, and they were banged up for longer and longer periods. I felt pretty useless. All I could do was listen. I can only imagine how much worse the conditions are today. The prison population began to rise sharply in the 90s. It doubled in the 20 years from 1992, and it's now over 87,000. Why? There are two main reasons: the court backlogs, which we've heard about, and longer sentences. The first one is addressed in the motion. The remand population's out of control due to the record high court backlogs. For the last couple of years, the government's allowed an unlimited number of sitting days in the courts to try and get the backlog down. But in the last couple of weeks, the new Labour government slipped out an announcement that it's going to put a cap on those sitting days at less than the number we needed last year. It's all to meet departmental cost savings, but at what price? More justice delayed. The second reason is the insatiable political desire for new criminal offences and longer sentences. Labour and the Tories are in this constant bidding war on who can talk toughest. It's the criminal justice equivalent of the military-industrial complex. Often these longer sentences are just a knee-jerk reaction, the desire to just do something. They heap more pressure onto the system, but they don't come with the resources that are needed. Public spending on justice fell by 22% under the last government. And fellow Liberal Democrats, I would urge you to resist the urge to play into this idea, this clamour for new offences, just because it might make a good campaign. That's not the Liberal Democrat approach. We should focus on what works and what's in this motion. Conference, there are no votes in prisons policy because prisoners can't vote. Maybe that's where we should start. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Can I ask Patrick Foster to stand by? And I now call Liz Adams. I mentioned earlier we had a request for a separate vote on line 71 and 72, and Liz is proposing that.
Conference. Firstly, I'd like to commend the vast majority of this motion and thank the authors for highlighting this urgent issue. My intervention today is focused on domestic abuse. It is with regret that I move for a separate vote on lines 71 and 72, and I do urge you to vote against the inclusion of those lines, which would make it our policy to call on the government to implement a presumption in law against handing down prison sentences of 12 months or less. The draft sentencing bill that had its second reading in Parliament last year sought to do this. However, there was a wealth of work done by the Domestic Abuse Commissioner and domestic abuse charities to campaign for an exemption, meaning that it won't apply to those who breach a court order or those who put an individual at significant risk of psychological or physical harm. That exemption is missing from lines 71 and 72 of this motion, and that means that if those lines remain, it gives the backing of conference to the presumption of short sentences, even if that is put forward without those appropriate or sufficient domestic abuse exemptions. It is too dangerous for victims to have this to be our official policy without explicitly referencing those exemptions. Grassroots members and individual MPs shouldn't have to keep re-campaigning every time this policy is raised to ensure that those are not forgotten. Now, I am quite open about my experiences as a survivor of domestic abuse, and as a barrister, I frequently work on cases involving domestic abuse. And domestic abuse offending is a different nature to many other types of offending. There's usually a pattern of multiple acts of offending taking place over long periods of time before either the victim is willing or the police are able to press charges. Just 4% of domestic abuse offences reported to the police result in a conviction. And the breach of a non-molestation order may well be the first conviction that doesn't in law attract a long sentence but is masking a history of offending behaviour. Short prison sentences are also crucial periods of time for victims to experience some respite, engage with services and to be able to relocate if necessary. And in my own case, that time proved absolutely crucial to my recovery. Reading lines 71 to 72 without any reference to the exemptions made me feel anxious, and I don't think that victims hearing our policy should be feeling that way. They should feel hopeful, understood and supported. We must, as Liberal Democrats, set an example, and domestic abuse has to be at the forefront of and properly considered throughout our policies, but most importantly in those affecting crime and the justice system. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Can I ask Cara Jenkinson to stand by? And I now call Sally, but no, I don't. I call Patrick Foster. Thank you very much, Patrick.
A change of sex as well, fantastic. Thank you very much for asking me to speak. It's a great pleasure. I ran a Through the Gates mentoring program at Wormwood Scrubs for 7 or 8 years. We had up to 50 volunteers at any time working in and around the prison system. So it's fantastic to hear restorative justice. It's fantastic to read the stuff in the motion, and I would support the motion pretty much wholeheartedly all the way through. Through the Gate mentoring systems work, and I'm so glad to see this is now in the policy, and this should be a mandated program in every prison in this country. Whether it be female, whether it be male, whether it be juvenile courts, this is something that can really work. And the reason it works is the reason the early release at the moment is going to absolutely fail. And that's because Through the Gates mentoring systems pick up the prisoners months before they're on to release. They work with their mentor as they go through the gates, literally. We pick them up at the gate of the prison. We take them to their residence, their home, and we've organized somewhere for them to live. And then, and this is the real key to it, they stay with them for as long as is required. And that can be, in some cases, 5, 6, 10 years later, they're still working with them. So I absolutely commend this motion that this should be mandated. And looking for some substance to that, this is a mandated program in Canada. If you look at Canada, re-offending rates are significantly lower across every single spectrum in the Canadian system. And part of that is because every prison in Canada has to have a Through the Gates mentoring program. This, by the way, if people didn't know it, is all volunteer run, so the cost to the public purse is minimal. And it really, really works. Now, in a broader context, I've been advocating for some time, as people probably in this hall know, that the Liberal Democrats have to take the criminal justice system seriously. We have to take restoring the prison system to some sense and order as a serious point, Now, those of you who follow the polls around the country will know that over the years, two policies are the least popular in this country. One was Europe, and the second was prisons. People just didn't care about them. Well, we know about Europe, and people about prisons, they know they don't care about them until they do. And when do they do it? Some people in this room are old enough to remember Strangeways. I remember looking out over the buildings in Manchester and seeing the prison burning, and that produced a huge change. When we had the prison riots in Birmingham about 5 years ago, most people don't know that the prisoners got within one door of burning the whole prison down. One door. And look what happened at Wandsworth last year. A guy got out by getting underneath a truck, and it shook the whole prison system to the core. People were moved from all over London to different prisons, and this is something that we have to take seriously. So I commend the emotion, I commend the idea of Through the Gates programming, and conference, let's get this to the heart of what we do in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. Can I ask Paul Kohler to stand by, and I now call Cara Jenkinson. Cara is Vice Chair of Federal Conference Committee.
Afternoon, Conference. As this motion rightly points out, the state of our prisons is truly shocking. The number of people left on remand is particularly scandalous over long periods because these people haven't yet been found guilty. But the crisis in our criminal justice system goes way beyond prisons. I've been a magistrate for 14 years, over the same time period that Conservatives were in power. And over that time, I've seen cuts across the system, to the Criminal Prosecution Service, legal aid, to court legal advisors, to probation. And what that means is that court backlogs continue to grow and victims are waiting for longer and longer for justice. And probation has larger and larger workloads, which means rehabilitation is compromised. As Sally has said, one of the reasons our prisons are so full is that sentences have got longer. It is the fault of both Labour and Conservative responding to alarmist newspaper headlines and ignoring the evidence on whether these longer sentences actually deter criminals or rehabilitate them better. We should also acknowledge that much of the early intervention work to stop people turning to crime in the first place has been hit by Conservative cuts. Someone from another party once said we need to be tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime. As a magistrate, most of the defendants that I see are either poor, have mental health issues, or have substance abuse issues, and it's usually a combination of all three. And they've usually made poor choices too. The Conservatives have cut the services that would have supported these people. Cuts to mental health provision, to youth services, to substance abuse programs mean that more people are likely to offend, and this is likely to get worse before it gets better, with school absenteeism and exclusions at record highs, and we know these are risk factors for offending. The new government has a chance to turn around the prison system, and this motion contains a timely set of recommendations which all build on our existing very sensible policy to improve rehabilitation and to act on the causes of crime. The real measure of success will be the size of the prison population. If we can reduce the number of people coming in, we can make prison work for the offenders that really do need to be there. Thank you.
Thank you, Cara. Can I ask Lord Mike German to stand by? And I now call Paul Kohler MP, our new MP for Wimbledon, to speak in favour of the motion.
Thank you, Conference. I would not be speaking to you today were it not for violent crime. 10 years ago, I was beaten within an inch of my life by 4 violent thugs who invaded my home, hooded and held captive my wife, and terrorised my daughter, who, hiding upstairs, rang the police, who arrived just as I was about to be dispatched. Even with the maximum third discount for pleading guilty, my 4 attackers were sentenced to a total of 64 years in prison, whilst I began my journey into politics, fighting the Brexiteers who attempted to misuse my story, and the Mayor of London who tried to close the police station from whence my saviours had come. It was a punishment that fitted the crime. And don't let anyone ever tell you, be it Tom Tugendhat or the Daily Telegraph that I or my party are soft on crime. Imprisonment is often the only solution for the cruel and dangerous. But to work properly, it must fulfill all four of its functions. Yes, it must punish. It must also deter. It must protect the public, and it must rehabilitate. Ask yourself, how far does our crumbling criminal justice system achieve these ends? Yes, it clearly punishes, as Dr. Khan so clearly illustrated, often inhumanly. However, given the abysmal and deteriorating clear-up rates, does it really deter? Does it really protect? And as for rehabilitation, that's long since been abandoned in our prison systems. This motion attempts to redress that final failure by providing prisoners with the help they need during their imprisonment and on release to change their lives and profit from their imprisonment, and reduce this country's terrible recidivism rates. It also seeks to promote alternatives to prison for the sad and wretched. James Timpson, the newly appointed Prisons Minister and previous chair of the Prison Reform Trust, is on record as saying at least a third of our prisoners should not be there. For this group, all prison does is make things worse. Whether their criminality is caused by the deprivations they've suffered, the company they keep, the drugs they take, or the skills they lack, prison simply compounds these problems. We must do better. And this motion and the amendments, including the extra one from John Bridges on restorative justice, which my family and I know all about from our own experience, which puts the victims at the heart of the criminal justice process, is an important first step in reversing years and years of decline in our penal system under the Tories and under Labour previously. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I now call Lord Mike German, our spokesperson in the House of Lords, to summate the motion.
And thank you, Paul, a very, very powerful speech. I think the one thing that we can draw a conclusion from this debate, of course, is our prison system is in crisis, from one end to the other, from sentencing through to probation. It's a mess, and we have to do something about it. We were only a day away in recent weeks from having a one-in, one-out policy for our prisons. In other words, prisons couldn't take any more, and therefore police could not arrest anybody else because there would be no room for them in our prisons. There is a huge amount of problem that has to be dealt with, and this motion attempts to do all that. But despite that, there is great work going on rehabilitation, mostly delivered by charities. And we've had outlined by Josh and others today some of the tremendous work that is being done. Except, of course, that the last government introduced dynamic pricing for prison facilities and have been pricing out some of these important rehabilitation activities, like redemption roasters at the Mount Prison. Conference, you can't treat prison facilities like Oasis tickets. It just will not work. And we need to support the third sector in all the brilliant things that they do. Of course, this motion has been strengthened by the 3 amendments, which I ask you to support because, of course, they add greatly to the motion that is before you. I just want to address the 2 queries that we've had. One about, and this is difficulty about supporting the lines on the presumption on shorter sentences. This, of course, is party policy and has been for some time. But the presumption here, the emphasis here is not on a presumption. I'll get that around, I'll turn it around the other way. The emphasis here is on a presumption and not on a certainty. And I have great sympathy for the domestic abuse matters which you raised, Liz, drawing on your personal experience as a survivor of abuse and as a lawyer in the domestic courts. And I'd like to thank you for the important contribution. And it's absolutely correct that we should take these matters into account and that we should expand our policy. Of course, the way to have done that would have been to have an amendment to these lines. But to remove these lines would be to damage what is already known, that most short sentences just don't work, that people have too little time for doing rehabilitative activities in prison, and also crucially, that those people go on more and more to reoffend, more reoffending from that group than any other form of prisoner. So I think that it would be wise, if you believe that we should have that policy as a background, to work further for the future on bringing the exemptions which Liz talked about. For Jack, well, you know, this policy is rather about shifting the needle. It's not about having retribution and imprisonment for that purpose. That's been there all the time. But what has happened is the needle has gone to the wrong side. It has moved in one direction, and we are trying to turn that back again to avoid the highest level of recidivism in Europe. You know, this policy that the last government put in place is madness. Reoffending costs us £18 billion a year, and we can't continue to ignore this problem. For that is before us as a benefit to taxpayers, it's a benefit to victims, it's a benefit to the prisoners themselves who want a more meaningful life, and for society as a whole. Conference, this system is broken and needs top-to-toe reform. And that's why this motion is so important. It lays out the way to a better justice system which serves prisoners, victims, and the public alike, which is why I ask you to support the motion with the 3 amendments, and so that we can take the necessary action to turn this issue around. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. We are now going to move to a series of 5 votes, so if everybody wants to limber up. We're voting for Amendment 1 first, then Amendment 2, then 3. Then we will vote on the separate vote request, and then we will vote on the motion as a whole. The online voting is open, and I can see some of those votes already starting to come in. So, Conference, can I ask those in favour of accepting Amendment 1 to please raise your cards now? Thank you. And those against? And looking at the online vote, which has been open for a few minutes now, Amendment 1 is clearly carried. Conference, can I now see those in favour of accepting Amendment 2? And again, tallying that with the online vote, Amendment 2 is clearly carried. Oh, sorry. That's a very good point. Can I see those against Amendment 2? There isn't anyone. Conference, can I see those in favour of Amendment 3? And again, looking at the online vote, doing it again. Can I see those against Amendment 3? No, thank you. And again, adding that to the online vote, that is clearly carried. I should say there are almost 300 members available to vote online at the moment. And we're seeing those come in, so thank you to those voting online. So we don't have it. I'd now like to take the vote on the separate vote request, which you can see in today's Conference Daily. That is the separate vote request would remove the lines 71 and 72 from the motion. Can I see in the hall those in favour of removing lines 71 and 72 from the motion? Thank you. And can I see those against? Yeah. So again, adding that to the online vote, that is, the separate vote request has failed and those lines remain within the motion. Thank you for everybody's patience. We now move to the vote of the motion as a whole, with the 3 amendments taken and the separate vote request refused. Can I see those in the hall in favour of accepting the motion? Thank you. And can I see those against? Thank you, Conference. Where is the... That The motion is very clearly carried. I'd like to thank all speakers for keeping to time and for having a fantastic debate. And I'd like to thank my aides, Chris Mains and Jenny Rigg, and I now hand the chair to Matthew Palmer for F34.
Thank you, Conference. If we could try and keep the time, and therefore, if you're leaving or entering the hall, can you please do so quickly and quietly? Thank you ever so much. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to session F34, speech from Jane Dodds, MS. So, without any further ado, please welcome to the stage Member of the Senedd for Mid and West Wales and Leader of the Welsh Liberal Democrats, Jane Dodds.
Wel, diolch yn fawr iawn, Prynhawn da, Cynhadledd, dyn ni nôl yng Nghymru. Dyn ni'n ennill eto yng Nghymru. Good afternoon, Conference. We are back in Wales and we are winning in Wales. We are so pleased that we elected David Chadwick to Brecon, Radnor and Cwmtawe, and that was just the beginning. David worked so hard, and I would personally like to thank him for everything he did in the campaign. We went from Llanwrtyd Wells in the west to Llanfihangel, Nant Melen. In the east, we went from Pontardawe in the south to Pontardawe. In the north, through Llyswen, Gwaun Cadgyrwen, Allwen. Once again, you, our supporters and our Welsh members, door-knocked, delivered leaflets in our towns, villages and hamlets. Thank you. Diolch yn fawr iawn. And I know that many of you outside of Wales know Brecon and Radnorshire really, really well because you came to help us in by-elections in the past years. In fact, I still think we haven't accounted for everybody who might still be up some farm track from 2019 in Banau Brycheiniog. But thank you to you all for your support to the Welsh Liberal Democrats. This year, we've also not just achieved that win in Brecon, Radnor and Cwmtawe, we've also done really well in other places in Wales. As well as in rural Wales, coming second in Ceredigion Preseli, we also came second in urban areas such as Cardiff East, and we increased our vote gains in Swansea West. We are winning everywhere. After the results in this general election, I actually go to media interviews with a bit of a spring in my step. The Conservatives in Wales have been a disaster. They did everything they could to manipulate our democratic system to win. They took away 8 MPs in Wales. They disenfranchised voters who had no photo ID. They demonised refugees continuously. But it didn't work in Wales. because we no longer have any Conservative MPs. But now, let's turn to Labour, because Labour in Wales are also a complete disaster. In Wales today, can you believe that nearly 1 in 3 children in Wales live in poverty? In Wales today, our rivers are amongst the most polluted in the country, with 2 of those being in the area that David and I represent. People are living in houses that are cold and costing a fortune in energy bills as they're not insulated. At the rate the Welsh Government is going to insulate fuel-poor homes, it will take 120 years. And our health service, hospital waiting times, are the highest they have ever been since 2022. That means 24,000 people have been waiting more than 2 years for treatment. Young people can't afford to live in our communities because they can't find well-paid jobs and housing that they can afford. That means our Welsh language is at risk of being lost. Colli ein iaith Gymraeg. As a Welsh speaker, this is personal. Fel siaradwr Gymraeg, mae hyn yn personol. It's also very personal for me with child poverty. As a social worker in child protection for 25 years, I wanted to see change. I worked with too many families who lived in poverty. I recently spoke with a young care experienced woman living in West Wales. She and her siblings were brought up by their mum, who tried to raise her children with no hope of being able to get out of poverty. Sadly, she just couldn't do it, and her children needed to live elsewhere. It's not right, is it? It's not right that children in poverty struggle. They suffer. They struggle to achieve in education, and they sometimes sadly can't live in their birth families. And do you know that there is a town in North Wales where you have a greater choice of food banks than you do of supermarkets? So what can we do differently? What can we, as Welsh Liberal Democrats, deliver differently for the people of Wales? Well, we have to start, obviously, by replicating the results in Brecon, Radnor and Cwmtawe in the Senedd elections in 2026. We have to see that replicated all over Wales. I know my brilliant colleague in Scotland, Alex Cole-Hamilton, wants more MSPs with him in Edinburgh. And I really want the same. I want some friends with me in the Welsh Parliament in 2026. I no longer want to be Billy No-Mates anymore. In Wales, we have a great story to tell. A story of our next election being all proportional representation. No first past the post nonsense anymore. A story of votes at 16, of automatic voter registration, and no photographic evidence needed to vote. Wales has a story of grit, hard work and innovation. A story of the National Health Service being born in Tredegar. A story of Eisteddfod's uprising, fighting for our Welsh language, ein iaith Gymraeg. A story of a plucky nation that wants to do better, but is being held back. A story of sport, a proud history of Welsh sporting achievements through the decades. And now, just look at Wrexham Football Club. Some of you will know that I was born and brought up in Wrexham, and between the ages of 11 and 18, I attended every single home game at the racecourse. We were in the 3rd division then, and getting a ticket for the Kop was really easy. We were so bad back then that my dad used to joke with me that when I'd go up to the turnstiles with a £10 note and say, 2, please, they would say to you, do you mean 2 spectators or that you want to buy 2 players? Wrexham has become a different place because 2 rich Americans took a chance on a small town in North Wales. They decided to invest and they had ambitions. And that's what the whole of Wales needs to see. Investment, ambition, the government taking risks. Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhaney were confident in Wrexham, and confidence breeds success. I want to see what's happened in Wrexham being replicated over the whole of Wales. And for us in Wales, it's more. It's a story of identity and longing. Hiraeth. We have a word in Welsh, and it's hiraeth. The definition of hiraeth is something along the lines of a deep longing, particularly for home. My mum and her mum, my 9, talked about hiraeth a lot. Mum won a scholarship in the 50s to study in New York. She left her tiny village in North Wales and went on the Queen Mary, because that was the only way of getting there then, and stayed in New York for 3 years. She longed for home at that time. That was hiraeth. The sense of hiraeth, perhaps the English is something along the lines of nostalgia, is something we should not let go of. A sense that we long for the feelings of the past that were good, people working together for the common good, communities collaborating, an economy that delivered fulfillment, employment, creativity, young people being able to choose where they wanted to work and live. This is what Wales is about. Now, a lot has been delivered since devolution. Proud to say we have no prescription charges for anyone, no charges for hospital parking. Just like Scotland, the smacking of children has been made a criminal offence. A review of all road building so that we can look at whether the monies go into public transport where that's possible. Wales is a proud nation of sanctuary, welcoming refugees and asylum seekers. One thing I'm really proud of is a basic payments pilot to all care-experienced young people for 2 years with an unconditional payment to some of our most vulnerable young people of £400 a week in cash. And the innovative Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which must ensure that every policy does not have a negative effect on the next generation. And the Pupil Development Grant, which supports children in school from the poorer backgrounds. Let's not forget, that was a Welsh Liberal Democrat policy. But we can't stop there. There is more to do. Why can't we build on our sense of nostalgia and pride in being Welsh and be ambitious, be bold, be visionary? This is the Welsh Liberal Democrats' vision, that every child in Wales has what they need to grow and thrive. That young people can stay in their communities with housing and decent, well-paid jobs to match. That our health services respond to us when we need them to and look after us to a high standard. That we are warm and comfortable in our homes, that our farmers have stability and certainty in their future, that businesses can invest in the green industries with support and skilled workers available, that we all live in safety, dignity, and can be who we want to be. This year, across the United Kingdom, Liberal Democrats have shown just how well we can win under first past the post. And in 2026, we want to show that we can win big under proportional representation. The opportunity put on the table is to cover Wales in Liberal Democrat gold. This is the biggest electoral opportunity that we have had in decades, and we need to take it. So if you want to build a Wales where no child is born into poverty, and where each child has the support that they need to flourish, so that regardless of the postcode of their birth, they can pursue their dreams, then you need to be with us. If you want to build a Wales that is optimistic, prosperous, and filled with pride, building on our Welsh identity and inherent ambition, you need to be with us. And if you want to build a Wales that looks outward to the world, confident in a better future that we can craft together, you need to be with the Welsh Liberal Democrats. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Diolch yn fawr, Jane, and thank you very much, Conference. I now hand over to Policy Motion F35 and thank my aide today, Lucas North. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Conference. We're running slightly behind schedule, so I will not keep you waiting anymore for the next really interesting debate on international development F35. Could I ask Malcolm Bruce to stand by, and I call to propose the motion Lady Moran, our Foreign Affairs and International Development spokesperson and Member of Parliament for Oxford West and Abingdon.
Thank you, Sam. Right, this is now my last motion that I'm proposing as our Foreign Affairs spokesperson. We got there. But thank you, Conference, because it's so fantastic to be here in Brighton to propose this incredibly important motion. Because poverty is one of the most significant challenges facing the world. And I don't know about you, but it's one of the reasons that I joined the Liberal Democrats, because I want to fight for those people. In 2023, the World Bank estimated that 961 million people are living in extreme poverty. That means they're subsiding on less than $2.15 a day. And despite some momentum in recent decades, the compounding challenges of COVID, climate change, and conflict have slowed and even in some cases reversed progress. Now, the 2030 deadline for meeting the Sustainable Development Goals is fast approaching. But Christian Aid have described the world as being tremendously off track to meet them. It's predicted that by then, over 600 million people will remain in extreme poverty. 665 million people will be undernourished. That's higher than in 2015. And 1 in 10 in the population of developing countries will still lack access to clean water. Liberal Democrats can be incredibly proud of our legacy in international development. We were the first political party in the UK to commit to spending 0.7% of GNI on ODA spending. And it was Liberal Democrats who enshrined this target in law when we were in government, with Nick Clegg supporting Michael Moore and my Lord's counterpart, Lord Jeremy Purvis's private member's bill. We did this because it is the right thing to do. Liberals believe that every person should have the resources and opportunities they need to succeed regardless of where they are born. And helping those most in need not only changes lives, but it also ensures that we build a stronger, safer, and more sustainable world. But Britain's reputation as an international development superpower has been seriously compromised by the previous Conservative government. Time and time again, they have turned their backs on the world's poorest, slashing the aid budget across the world. Boris Johnson abolished the Department for International Development, merging it with the Foreign Office, which the National Audit Office said reduced the department's development capability. And then Rishi Sunak took the decision to cut the development spending budget from 0.7% of GNI to 0.5%, basically overnight. This resulted in thousands of preventable deaths and vital programs being cut. UK bilateral ODA spending has been further cut by former Conservative government failures to cut the asylum backlog, resulting in almost 30% of UK ODA spend being on in-country refugee costs. That is shameful. Now, I've seen for myself the good that the UK aid budget can do. Last year, I visited Kenya with the charity Stop AIDS. The power of education for women and girls was plain to see. We visited a government-run healthcare facility on the outskirts of the city and met women carrying their babies. All of them, frankly, miracles in their own right, because every single one was living with HIV. One pregnant mother came over and told us her moving story. We learned that when she was young, she received very little education and certainly almost nothing about HIV at school. So she didn't know, once she'd contracted HIV from her second husband, that the treatment was now so sophisticated, you could suppress the viral load so that you didn't pass it on to your children. And there she was, pregnant with her fourth child, in a treatment center, and there because there were peer mentors who explained this to her, women also living with HIV out in the communities who had got her the help that she needed. And across Kenya, as in so many other countries, the chances that that mother contracting HIV in the first place significantly reduces if she completes primary school. And it reduces even still if she goes to secondary, as does her economic prospects, independence, and health for her future children. So it was with sadness that we heard not just about the incredible things that the money that we send to the Global Fund does, but also what has happened to that space that that NGO is in now since the funds have been slashed. Now, I have to say, we've all had hope for this Labour government, and I'm delighted to get rid of the Tories, but I have been disappointed about the Labour government showing so little appetite for change. The incoming government has no plans to re-establish an independent department for international development, and it has not yet committed to restoring aid spending back to 0.7% where it belongs. We will fight for it, and I hope they change their approach and that they do it fast. I can promise you, Conference, all 72 of our Liberal Democrat MPs that you've helped to elect will be standing up loudly and proudly calling for those international development budgets to be restored. So I'm proud to be able to propose this motion to you today, to reaffirm yet again our commitment to immediately reversing that cut. But we do need to go further. And if you've not read the motion, I would encourage you to do so, because we also must re-establish that Department for International Development. We need to restore full funding for programs supporting in particular women and girls, and restore humanitarian relief, the Humanitarian Relief Reserve Fund. It is also vital that we step up to meet the biggest challenge of our lifetimes. That is the climate crisis, by increasing the proportion of aid committed to this issue. Development spending is a powerful tool for good in the world which helps the most disadvantaged and the most vulnerable. And for the UK to play its best part in that role on the world stage, we desperately need to restore our role as a superpower in that sector. So, conference, I urge you, vote for this motion, reaffirm our commitment to the world's poorest, and restore Britain's position on the world stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Layla. Could I ask George Cunningham to stand by, and I call Malcolm Bruce to speak in favour of the motion.
Thank you, Conference. And first of all, I support this motion in its entirety. And having been chair of the International Development Committee, I was absolutely appalled by the way Boris Johnson trashed our aid and development programme, and was pleased to be able to work cross-party to prevent him from getting rid of the Independent Commission on Aid Impact and abolishing the International Development Committee. But that's not good enough, because the damage that's been done is enormous, and I want to speak specifically on lines 37 and 38 about the implications of our disengagement from Africa and the space it has created for much less sympathetic forces, especially from Russia, to occupy where we had originally built relationships. And you know what Russia is doing? It's basically stepping in to say, we are the champions against your colonial overlords that masquerade as aid providers and can't be trusted, and they are getting traction. We need very urgently to rebuild our connection and our relationship on aid, on trade, on diplomacy, across the board, and connect with people who understand that we share values that they aspire to and that Russia certainly doesn't. I don't know if any of you were at the World Service breakfast this morning, but I was shocked to learn that it is estimated that Russia and China are spending £6 to £8 billion a year building communication platforms in developing countries to ensure that their values are exported, as we are cutting our world service and have cut our aid programs and our diplomatic engagement. Our trade has fallen back, our investment has fallen back. We have taken £6.5 billion of aid out of Africa, and we are nowhere near putting it back. It's not about soft power. We have, in particularly East and South Africa, a legacy of goodwill that still exists. Sadly, the French have blown their legacy, and Russia is exploiting it. We need to get back and to show people in Africa we are their friends, we share their values, we want to build a sustainable economic development, we want to help them deliver education and health and deliver their own capacity to do it. We want to do it in a way that enhances freedom, democracy, and the rule of law, and that if we don't do it, China and Russia will do the exact opposite. This isn't just about aid and development, it's about the long-term relationship of our standing in the world and who has influence and trust of the global South. We've done an awful lot to damage that trust. This motion and the Liberal Democrats' commitment to it could start the process of rebuilding, and it's urgent, and we need to do it now.
Thank you, Malcolm. Could I ask Sam Al-Hamdani to stand by, and I call George Cunningham from Lib Dem Overseas to speak in favour of the motion.
Dear fellow Liberal Democrats, I wish to support the motion and make 3 quick points. Firstly, we must not forget Afghanistan. When I worked in Afghanistan 2016 to 18, real progress was made, at least in the urban areas in the north, for women's rights. Now we have a devastating situation under Taliban rule. What can be done? Well, first of all, we must continue to deny international recognition of the Taliban regime, the one issue that they desperately seek. We must keep Afghan embassies in the hands of the previous government and deny the Taliban a voice at the United Nations. Secondly, the UK needs to keep the Central Asian region engaged, front and centre. Afghanistan's neighbours are important players who want to see a moderate Taliban. Thirdly, continued support for the United Nations and NGO family in supporting of women, especially economic empowerment, and very importantly, monitoring human rights situation within Afghanistan and reporting it to the international community. And fourthly, we must try by all means to continue girls' education online and by open scholarships abroad for Afghan refugees. Secondly, the world is changing. Many countries are moving into the middle income bracket, and some are becoming potential donors. They need to play to the same rules of the game as traditional donors. Emerging major global players such as China and the United Arab Emirates need to be brought into the existing donor system. Certainly China's huge and oftentimes malevolent presence in the world needs better tempering by renewed efforts by the UK and others to bring them to our tent, difficult as it may be. Finally, we all want to increase the UK's ODA from 0.5 to 0.7% GNI. But I think we do need to make the case to our publics for an immediate increase, as the motion says, given the country's fiscal black hole. The motion does not cost the return to 0.7%. What is the cost? A recent Public First poll showed foreign aid bottom of a list of 11 items people in this country would be prepared to pay more for in terms of taxes, with 75% of the British public against. We always assume total support, but we have to be careful. The 0.7% target was first proposed by the Pearson Commission a half a century ago, and the UK is in a very different economic situation than it was then. The case to our citizens must be made and not assumed. Conference, please support the motion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, George. I now call Sam Al-Hamdani from Oldham to speak in favour of the motion. I could ask Tara Foster to stand by.
Thank you. Thank you, Conference. It should be very clear why it's important to stop Russia and China having an open hand on the international stage, and the point was very well put already. But it's not just that international aspect of it. In the UK, we have the leader of a political party who has a seat in the House of Commons, who has a record of appeasement of Vladimir Putin. Now, for him, international development is not a way of protecting the poor. It's not a way of addressing the problems of globalization, problems which hurt the very poorest in our own country. It's not a way of us standing tall in the world, a statement that we should strive every day to help people in crisis, and sadly, a crisis that we have in many cases contributed to. International development does not stop at our front door. Now, the UK is currently funding 7 projects through the International Labour Organization, which I used to work for. And a number of those are on modern slavery. And as an example of the work that they are doing as international development, this is a perfect example because those slavery networks don't stop overseas. They come into this country where people are left, they are abused, they are serially exploited in this country. And that international development work is protecting people right here. Now, at the moment, the message is being put out that it's somehow a choice between pensioners keeping more and more international aid. No, that is not the choice. We need to be proud of our international development for what it does overseas and for what it does in our country. Because what makes Britain great is when we stand up for the world's poor. What makes Britain great is when we stand up for asylum seekers, for victims of modern slavery, for the people that globalization is failing. And what makes Britain great is when we stand up on the world stage against dictators. Now, we need to be the party that makes that case, because sadly, nobody else is. And when we do it, we need to take the people of the UK with us, because all too often right now, that is not happening. So pass the motion and take it and speak to people about how international development makes us great Britain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. Could I ask David Chalmers to stand by and I call Tara Foster from Southampton to speak for the motion?
Good afternoon, Conference. I'm delighted to be here as a first-time conference goer and as a first-time speaker. So if I slur my words or mess anything up, I do apologise. So I was an officer in the Royal Navy until January of this year, and in 2022, I was lucky enough to deploy to the South China Sea for my initial sea time training period, and in that period, I briefly visited Brunei. I witnessed firsthand the relationship Britain enjoys with her allies in the region. The Royal Navy is regarded as the mother navy to many of these nations, and we have a tremendous amount of soft power with these nations, encouraging peace, freedom, justice, and security. When Britain has an internationalist position and outlook, people overseas think more favourably of Britain. This is obvious. They are more willing to do business in Britain, and they are more willing to look to British companies to fulfil their own needs. And with all that in mind, I firmly believe that when Britain is outward-looking, the lives of British people, both at home and overseas, are better. International aid forms a very, very key part of this. It is both about righting the wrongs of Britain's sadly very bloody colonial past, whilst maintaining the enduring collegiate links left by empire. The Royal Navy also has a key role in this, acting as a figurehead for Britain globally and acting as a shining example of Britain's outward look. But obviously this requires money. The defence budget is stretched, and if the Royal Navy is to play a key role in Britain's soft power, we just simply need more money to international development. Otherwise, we can't play the key role in aid distribution that we have done for centuries. We need to enable our services to be a force for good, and for that reason, we need that 0.7% of GDP. So I would really encourage conference to support this motion and get the money available to international development back to where it belongs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tara. Could I ask Callum Miller to stand by, and I call David Chalmers, the Chair of the Federal International Relations Committee, to speak in favour of the motion.
Good afternoon, Conference. This is a motion which has the full support of my committee, Federal International Relations Committee, and its members. We believe that actually bringing back the 0.7 GNI is something that we as a party have stood for. We have put as one of our main priorities in our policies, and it is something which we support, including an independent Department for International Development. I fully support all the points within the motion, but I just want to actually focus on one area which I think has been missed out, and I hope it's an oversight. When we're talking about the individuals who are marginalised and groups within communities around the world, I want to mention the LGBT community. And I know that our party and what we do is that we stand up for them wherever we possibly can. They are part of the communities in countries where aid has really been able to make a difference to their lives. When I have led delegations to Liberal International, it has been the Lib Dems that have put forward motions supporting the LGBT community in Uganda and condemning the anti-homosexuality bill that was brought in there. And there was a mention to Afghanistan. What is happening to women and girls there is absolutely abhorrent. But there's also an LGBT community there that is suffering just the same. And many of those are being murdered and persecuted. And what we want to do with our country is to be able to restore that aid budget and make sure that we again are a beacon for hope in the world. And that for our values, we take that forward with our sister parties, internationally, in this country, and in Parliament. So I'd urge you to please support this motion and make sure that we actually restore ourselves as a superpower, as one of the other speakers have said, on the soft power on this issue of international aid around the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I ask Johnny Singh to stand by, and I call Callum Miller MP, a newly elected Member of Parliament for Bicester and Woodstock, to speak in favour of the motion.
Thank you. Conference, in December 2019, a few months before COVID struck, DFID approved a £46 million programme to provide initial training to over 78,000 healthcare workers in developing countries, including improving maternal and neonatal care. This was cancelled in 2021, not because the need had diminished, far from it, when the WHO reports that 800 women die every day from preventable causes relating to childbirth and pregnancy. No, it was cancelled due to the short-sightedness of the last Conservative government. UK leadership in international development was a key part of our influence in the world until 2020. As someone who had campaigned for debt relief and for the 0.7 target as a student, I was proud as a civil servant to negotiate that debt relief on behalf of the UK and to serve governments, Labour and coalition, who moved us towards the 0.7 target. International development is a contested sector, but for at least a decade, partners around the world would agree that DFID was a leader. But then in 2020, as Leila has highlighted, two announcements gravely damaged the UK's ability to sustain this impact. First, the announcement that the Foreign Office and DFID were going to merge, and secondly, the announcement that we were moving away from the 0.7 target. These decisions were morally wrong and strategically short-sighted. And what is more, the cuts to ODA have been deepened by the increasing use of ODA for the costs of our failed asylum system here in the UK. Today, less than 0.35 of GNI is actually spent overseas. This motion is right to highlight the generosity of the British people. We understand that we share a common humanity with those around the world. When we learn of natural disasters, war, climate impacts, and sheer grinding poverty, we want to respond. It is the right thing to do. But it's also, as other speakers have highlighted, the smart thing to do. Our nations are interconnected, whether it's in climate, disease, conflict, or migration. The cooperation that we fuse with other countries around the world protects our country. And as Malcolm Bruce and others have highlighted, there is an era of strategic competition now when Russia and China are challenging around the world, and diminishing UK soft power reduces our ability to have the impact we could. And that is why it is so disappointing that Labour has not committed to restore funding and to repair the damage done to DFID. Keir Starmer said in 2020 that he'd do both things, but now in office he has resiled on those commitments, and we as Liberal Democrats in Parliament will hold him to that. We believe in a moral duty to support the most vulnerable in the world. We believe the world is safer and more secure when countries cooperate, and we believe that ODA should be spent overseas.
Thank you, Callum. Could I ask Christine Cheng to stand by, and I call Johnny Singh from the Borough of Brent to speak in favour of the motion.
Conference, good afternoon. This motion represents good policy, good politics, and it reaffirms our moral commitment to support the most vulnerable populations in the world. Over the last decade or so, I've had the great privilege of working on the front lines of international development in Myanmar, in South Sudan, and in the Sahel. And while imperfect, our interventions there have saved lives. But more than that, they've shown communities that we care and that British people care about them in their time of need. Now, this is good policy in this motion because by championing an independent Department for International Development, a fund to respond to the effects of conflict, and a focus on debt relief and economic crimes, we put in place the architecture of a relevant and strategic policy on development. And at the same time, our specific focus on areas around education, malnutrition, water and sanitation, and climate allows us to set clear outcome-related goals where we can leverage the expertise that we have and also allow space to develop new technologies and new approaches that can tackle those challenges. And this is good politics as well, both at home and abroad. Whilst Labour and Tories squabble over reform voters and the isolationist vote, we have a chance to position ourselves with a true liberal alternative that we should be proud to take out into our communities. And overseas, this represents a chance for us to re-engage with allies, with partners, and with multilateral bodies to put forward the case of an interventionist approach that can actually tackle some of the world's biggest issues. Together with defence and diplomacy, international development is one of the pillars of our liberal foreign policy that I and others have articulated over the last couple of years. This motion is an excellent
stabilisation of the development pillar, and it gives us a strong foundation to build on that and put forward a truly liberal alternative for the way that we engage with the world. Please support this motion, and let's show the world and our voters and our communities that the Liberal Democrats care and we are prepared to act. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johnny. Could I ask David Green to stand by, and I call Christine Cheng from the Borough of Kingston.
Conference. Layla, David, Tyra, and others have appealed to your sense of compassion and social justice as Liberal Democrats in supporting this motion. I'm going to take a different tack and appeal to you as pragmatists and as realists. So all around us, a realignment of global power is taking place, and I'm sure all of you feel it, right? We're seeing countries like India, like Brazil, Indonesia, Nigeria, Malaysia, South Africa, all becoming really critical regional powers. And critically here, we've seen the rise of China, as many of the previous speakers have already spoken about. Part of China's success, though, is thanks to the counteroffer, the very interesting counteroffer it has made to the Global South countries through the Belt and Road Initiative. Since 2013, China has invested $1.3 trillion, not billion, trillion, $1.3 trillion in the Belt and Road Initiative. So in Africa alone, more than 40 countries have signed agreements to join the BRI with investments in building railroads, electricity grids, roads, ports, all sorts of infrastructure, from Nigeria to Kenya, South Africa to Ethiopia, and everywhere in between. So we find ourselves really at a critical juncture. Liberal democracy, our model here for organizing society and delivering benefits to our citizens, actually now faces a very formidable competitor in China and the offer that it's giving. So how do we respond? I think we need to reimagine our role in global development, and Britain should be a key player in this. We can and should make the case for liberal democracy on the world stage with development assistance at its very core. And obviously, we need to restore our budget back to 0.7% of GNI. The budget cuts in recent years have really reduced our global influence, and we need to actually reestablish those relationships. But conference, I'm arguing that funding itself is not enough. We need a fundamental shift in our approach, in our very tone. We need to move away from being patrons to being genuine partners in development. We need to see ourselves as part of a common sense of human development where we respect and learn from our Global South partners as much as they learn from us. We need to measure success in this field not by how much money we're spending, but by how many lives we've improved and how many communities we've empowered. This isn't just about maintaining our global influence, but it is that too. It's about demonstrating that liberal democracy can actually work in the Global South. It's about offering a compelling alternative to authoritarian capitalism. Conference, the challenges we face are immense, but so are the opportunities. We must restore Britain's commitment in international development. We have to shift from being a patron to being a partner. So I urge you to support this motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christine. Could I ask Jeremy Purvis to stand by, and I call David Green, the candidate for the Scottish parliamentary elections for Caithness, Sutherland and Ross.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Conference. 3 quick points I wish to make. The first on localisation and the nature of development. The second about the nature of the global debt crisis. And the last point, a reflection on the politics of this debate. So on that first point, I think the party is absolutely spot on when it comes to leading that charge on restoring 0.7%. But of course, it's not just how much we spend on development, it's how it's spent as well. Only 14% of humanitarian funding goes to local aid organisations. And all too often, it is those local aid organisations that are the first to respond in a crisis. So localisation is not just about shifting resources, it's about putting power in the hands of the communities themselves to lead themselves up out of development. That is the future of development, and we should get right behind it. On global debt, this is one of the biggest challenges when it comes to eradicating poverty around the world. 34 African countries, that's 34, spend more on external debt repayments than on health or education. In fact, in the last year alone, African governments right the continent over spent over 50 times more, again on debt repayments, than the entirety of the UK aid budget. What does this mean then? So it means children are missing out on school. It means pregnant women are unable to give birth in a hospital. It means swathes of communities the world over are trapped in a cycle of hunger. But the UK has a big role to play. Approximately 90% of the debt owed by private creditors by lower income countries is governed by English law. The government could introduce legislation to compel private lenders to cancel that debt, and it should. Annalise Dodds, then Shadow Chancellor in 2021, agreed. Now the Development Minister, will she follow those words with some action? But on the politics, of course we will work with Labour where possible, but who will hold their feet to the fire? And believe me, they need it. The Conservative Party, they cannot be trusted. They gutted the aid budget and the party's an absolute mess. But it won't be the SNP in this Parliament either. They're left but a rump of what they once were. So it has to be us, Conference, and it should be us. Please support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I now call Jeremy Purvis, the spokesperson for Foreign Affairs and International Development in the House of Lords, to summate the debate.
How great it is to just follow the next MSP for the Highlands, David. You're going to be brilliant. This debate is the very essence of us. It's why we exist. And I thank all of the speakers who took part in the debate. I thank the Lib Dems in Development Network. And I very warmly welcome our new MPs who got such a breadth of international perspective and experience that we will be able to see in the House of Commons. The development challenges are enormous, as Leila said when she opened this debate, but the richest countries are reneging on their obligations, including, over the last few years, the UK. We saw double standards on the COVID response, as Callum said. We saw it on double standards on conflict. And we continue to see it in double standards on the climate response. All of these areas we need to correct. And in doing so, George, I say to you, of course, we will not forget those who are being persecuted just simply because of their gender in Afghanistan. Wendy Chambers is doing brilliant work on that area. Sudan is an area which is the worst humanitarian crisis on the planet, but the most ignored, and I want us to be the party that makes Sudan's humanitarian relief our mission. But we know that, as we heard, the Sustainable Development Goals are off beam. I can reassure David that SDG 10, ensuring that no one will be persecuted, especially those within the LGBTQ community, will be far from our minds at all. And for Tara, brilliant first speech at conference, summed it up perfectly. Of our armed forces, they support our calls for more ODA, not a false dichotomy of cutting one to pay for the other. Leila mentioned that I was able to play a small part in the legislation for 0.7, reneged on outrageously and unforgivably by the Conservatives. When I took that bill through the House of Lords stages, I said that it was a great pleasure for me, this is in 2015, it was a great pleasure for me to introduce a legislation that would implement a manifesto commitment from the Liberals. That commitment was for the June 1970 manifesto, and we've had it in every manifesto since, and I was so proud that we had it in this manifesto in this election. But we also know that we need to deliver that ODA effectively through a principle of partnership. It's why we had in our manifesto 15% of ODA should be on education in those areas where the young people need it the most. We would restore the crippling and outrageous cuts to water and sanitary health affecting young women in particular in so many areas. And we would restate the focus on reducing absolute poverty. And yes, Callum, absolutely, official development assistance should also be overseas development assistance. And it was the Liberal Democrats in Parliament that first exposed and then highlighted the outrageous situation that last year we spent more bilateral ODA in the UK than overseas on reducing absolute poverty. An outrage. And yes, an independent development department. Not simply recreating DFID, but a development department that again can be the thought leader and the principled leader on development around the world, as DFID had been, but one very much focused on partnership. In my mind, a development for global transition, where countries, they know where they get to, but they are struggling on that journey, and the UK should be the partner of choice, but one where we can do it at scale. If Labour do not restore the 0.7 over the lifetime of their parliament, this will be a missed opportunity of £25 billion of ODA. Imagine what that can do for an impact, but also imagine what we can use the leadership for with levering other rich countries around the world to reach their obligations. When we ask the British people to respond to emergencies, they do so brilliantly and they do so generously, and we are not afraid of asking them to support us. Because, my friends in our party, the advances on development policy over the last few years and its budget have not happened by accident. They've happened because we exist. We campaigned for it, and when we had an opportunity in government, we delivered it, and in Parliament, we have been the strongest campaigners against the reneging. Unfortunately, friends, we're going to have to do it again. But I don't think anybody is shy or feeble or not willing to fight for it, because we will. And this motion, at our first conference after a successful general election campaign, shows that we will campaign for it and we will be successful again. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. For those who are voting online, the poll is now open. Can I just thank everyone who put in speakers' cards that I wasn't able to call? There was a lot of expertise from people I'd love to hear from, maybe in the bar later, and there wasn't time to call you, so very sorry about that. If you would like to speak in something, though, there are motions tomorrow. There's an emergency debate on Grenfell and also on child poverty, so other opportunities to speak. Just give a moment for the online votes. And move to the hall. Could those in favour of the motion please raise your cards now? Thank you. And those against? That is overwhelmingly, if not unanimously, carried. Thank you very much, everyone. I now hand over to the following session with Councillor Shafak Mohammed on musicians. Thanks very much.
Could colleagues leaving the hall please do so quickly? The next debate is about to start and we have more cards than we can allocate speakers. Thank you. Good afternoon, conference, and welcome to F36, which you will find on page 45 to 48 on the agenda. There is one amendment, which you can find on page 11 of Conference Daily. There will also be a separate vote on Conference Notes 6B on line 20 and Conference Call for 2B on line 73, which are the lines regarding VAT cuts on GMVs. As I said earlier, we've had lots of speakers' cards, so I'm going to be very strict on the button. Once the red light comes on, I will be muting people. So, without further ado, can I ask Jess Brown-Fuller to stand by, and can we have Charlie Clinton from Camden, please? Thank you.
Telling a musician that they're going to have to shut up, that's dangerous. Hi, conference. I'm going to start by thanking the London Lib Dems and the Camden Lib Dems for their support in passing this motion on their council and in London and supporting it, bringing it to the National Conference. And I would also like to start by answering a question that people have been asking me all day, which is, no, I will not be blowing my own trumpet on stage today. I did do that at my general election campaign launch, and it worked very well, but there is a time and a place. I'm also going to add that this is a motion for all musicians, all fans of all genres. It is not specific, as well as for everyone who works in the industry. Now, for me, the decision to bring together music and politics started with Fiona Fay in Lewisham. Fiona is a classical musician who often practices at home during the day. Her neighbour repeatedly complained to the council, despite Fiona's attempts to compromise. Eventually, Fiona was slapped with an enforcement notice and told that if any music was heard outside her flat, the council would fine her £5,000 and confiscate all her instruments because, and I quote, all music is a nuisance, no matter the volume or the time of day. Fiona wanted to take legal action, and the common law would have backed her up, but she simply didn't have the time or the money, and instead she was forced to move out just as after Liz Truss tanked the economy and sent the rent skyrocketing. So she ended up sofa surfing for months while she was trying to find a home. Now, it's a compelling story, and it's a clear example of where we as Liberal Democrats could step in and offer a fairer deal by simply committing to uphold the existing common law. But this is only one issue among many. It has always been financially challenging to be a working musician. 43% of the musicians in this country earn less than £14,000 a year. And it's also not cheap to fund a music education or to fund the kit you need. The national trends of recent years, from COVID to the cost of living crisis, have amplified these issues and are making it ever less viable for many to learn an instrument or to go professional. And as a part-time musician and a band leader myself, I've seen the squeeze on my friends firsthand. At times, I've paid them their gig fees in advance so they could pay their rent. But there are also very specific challenges facing the industry which require specific solutions. Brexit has created costly and damaging red tape for musicians trying to tour Europe, and it is the young, upcoming musicians who are struggling the most, losing most or even all of their touring income. In 2023, 16% of all the grassroots music venues in this country shut down entirely or stopped offering live music. These venues operate with an average profit margin of 0.5% because they actively subsidize the musicians that play there. So they simply could not cope with the spike in costs over the last couple of years, and more will fold without help. Other venues have struggled because of the lax attitude of councils to the agent of change principle. The Manchester venue, Night and Day, has been forced to fight an expensive legal battle after a developer failed to adequately soundproof new residential properties next door. Policy guidance on this issue is not enough. We need the agent of change principle embedded into law. And what about the next generation? Oh, walking around. The sad reality is that participation in music among school children is both unequal and in decline. Music GCSE and A-level participation is dropping, and currently only 15% of state schools offer sustained music tuition. I also just heard this week that Labour's plans to charge private schools VAT mean that the independent musicians who work at those schools are also going to be charged VAT, and I know of a cello teacher who is right now losing students as a direct result. We hope that Labour will be better than the Tories for the arts, but right now they are making things worse. And this is not everything. Councils are cutting art budgets, festivals have closed down, the full impact of AI is only beginning to be felt. The list goes on, but we could not cover everything in this motion. The bottom line is that the future of the music industry is at risk, and it needs our help. So what are the proposed solutions? We're calling on our many councillors and MPs to strengthen both local and national policy around nuisance and planning, ensuring musicians and venues are not unfairly treated. We're also calling on both groups to look at how they can invest more in music education, locally and nationally. This is vital to ensure we create the next generation of musicians, but it's also proven that music education improves overall academic achievement. We're reaffirming our support for musicians to tour and work freely in Europe once again, and we're backing calls from the Music Venues Trust and the DCMS Committee for a large venue levy in order to create the funds for grassroots music. grassroots music venues, rather. The levy would secure the future of these valuable community assets as it has done in France, and it will also help to ensure a strong pipeline of talent for the future. And let's be really clear, these venues can afford it. The average ticket price is £84, and Taylor Swift sold 712,000 tickets for her 8 Wembley shows. Just based on that, that would be £60 million for 8 nights. The DCMS report recommended the industry should be given until September to impose the levy voluntarily. They haven't. As a candidate for Holborn and St Pancras in the recent election, I personally reminded Keir Starmer that this was the case because he is once again the MP for some of our most famous music venues in Camden Town. And now passing this motion today will send another reminder, send a message to the Labour government and the industry that the Liberal Democrats have not forgotten about the report, and neither should they. But while we sort out the levy, these venues need help today, and that is why we're backing the call for the short-term temporary cut in VAT for grassroots venues, to give them the financial headroom they need right now. There is a request for a second vote on this to remove that VAT cut from the motion, and I understand the concerns, but this is an industry in crisis. These venues need that headroom, and they need it now, or they may be lost forever. The short-term cut is a complement to the levy and the other possible longer-term solutions, so I'd strongly urge you to keep the VAT cut in the motion. I also want to thank Jess, who's put in Amendment 1, calling for us to properly regulate the secondary ticketing market, cap transaction fees, and ban surge pricing of tickets. These measures will help ensure that music fans also get a fair deal, so I'd urge you to vote for Amendment 1. And to finish, let me just reiterate that today, everything may appear fine at the top of the music scene. Even Oasis are back. But the foundations are crumbling. What will it look like in 10 or 20 years if we don't tackle these challenges now? Our music industry will decline, and we will be culturally, financially, and creatively poorer as a nation. To paraphrase Don McLean, I do not want to see the day the music dies. You can help to take a small step on the road to saving it by passing this motion. And if you want to talk more about what you can do to help, come and visit us at the Lib Dem Creative Network stall in the lobby. Thank you.
Could I ask Councillor Andrew Hale from Twickenham and Richmond to stand by, and can we welcome Jess Brown-Fuller from Chichester, MP.
Good afternoon, Conference, and thank you to Charlie for moving the motion. It was my daughter's 5th birthday party over the summer holidays. Bear with me, this is relevant. And we'd hired a community centre in my constituency, and we had all the things. We had the bouncy castle with slide, the cake, the sweets, and there was loads of 5-year-olds running in circles, hyped up on sugar, while all their parents sat in a row, staring at their phones and their screens, looking at the huge number in front of them to represent their place in the queue for Oasis tickets. Now, those parents that came to my daughter's 5th birthday party that were successful are looking forward to an evening of great live music, a cornerstone of our culture, an opportunity to come together as a nation to sing Wonderwall at the top of their lungs. But some got to the front of the queue only to find that the initially advertised cost had more than doubled, with no prior warning due to surge pricing. Half of Britons are already priced out of attending live music events in recent years, and with grassroots music venues closing at a rate of 1 a week, our access to great live music is getting harder, an issue that is then exacerbated by ticket touts, mass buying tickets for both sporting and cultural events, and then selling them on to keen and sometimes desperate fans at high inflated prices. Now, as a proud choir conductor, I'm passionate about music in all its forms and the powerful effect that it has on bringing people together, highlighted last night with a number of conference attendees singing their hearts out at Communioke. And Chris won't blow his own trumpet, but excellent work at Communioke. Now, music at all levels needs to be accessible, from seeing your local community choir in the village hall to seeing Oasis at Wembley. And that's why we need to end the exploitation of fans by ticket trolls and introduce legislation to ban the use of surge pricing by ticket platforms. And that's why I'm pleased to move this amendment today, and I urge you all to please support it.
Could I ask Mary Reid to stand by? And can we ask Councillor Andrew Hale from Twickenham and Richmond?
And good afternoon. Hi, I'm from the Barnes ward in the London Borough of Richmond upon Thames, and it's a rich borough of music, and we had, for example, the Eel Pie Island heritage on the Twickenham side, and in my own ward we have what was the old recording studios in the Olympic Cinema is now a cinema, and one of the things I want to say is that, as Chris alluded to, it's a fair deal for musicians, but it's a fair deal for crew as well. And I myself have been a crew member for over 20 years now, and it's how I've made my living, and it's a self-employed thing, and it's extremely difficult. So I really encourage any policy motions we can bring forward to help musicians and any of the creative industries, because it's helping a much wider industry than just the musicians, including the people who built the set for this show, for this conference, our wonderful BSL signers, and all of the crew that make sure you can hear and see us right now. So please fight for this, because it helps a much wider and much more accessible industry. My musical sort of reference is that while we celebrate 72 MPs being on, Metallica are going around doing their 72 Seasons album tour, and Lars Ulrich was a massive proponent in fighting for rights in regards to online music streaming. And we, as a party, should really be behind making sure that musicians can earn a decent living from the streaming of their music. Most of your earning as a musician, as has been already mentioned, is through doing the gigs nowadays. It's not right that they can't earn in the same way they used to when it was on a cassette tape or on vinyl or CD or whatever format you think you bought before. So we really need to make sure we're fighting for that, and also fighting for better movement for musicians going to and from countries. It's not just the big bands. My cousin's husband is a drummer. I'm a drummer too, by the way. There's a lot of drumming in this. My cousin's husband has just gone on a European tour. It was full of lots of bureaucracy that they had to go through, lots of paperwork and extra money that they had to spend to be able to do it this time. And it was a real headache, and it really marred the experience, and it marred the level of income. And it's a shame, because also he runs a school. He set up an academy in the Wirral, which is so popular that he's now actually had to spend 6 hours overnight knocking through to the next room to expand the business. Because the kids want to do it. The kids want to learn musical instruments, so we must make sure that we provide for that. Thank you very much.
That was Andrew's maiden speech, so congratulations. Could we ask Brandon Massey from Reading to stand by, and can I ask Mary Reid to come and speak? 4 lines in particular, 55 to 58 and 62 to 68. Mary.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, conference. I've spoken at conference on many issues, from funerals, would you believe, to IT, to empowering communities, but it's rare that we have a chance to talk about the creative industries. As a society, we do take artists and what they produce for granted. Music, drama, and images are so much embedded in our lives that we often forget that there's a huge industry behind them, supporting individuals whose creativity needs to be nurtured, and often from an early age. Now, most of us experience and enjoy a wide range of musical genres through our headphones, as background music to films, live at gigs held in arenas, concert halls, clubs and pubs. And we all do music as well. We sing at sports events. We do karaoke, well, some better than others. We dance, we hum, we clap along and tap our feet, and we sing hymns, well, some of us do. Music is part of who we are. Now, Michael Gove and the Tories have seriously damaged education with their emphasis not on the whole child's development, but on the economic benefits to society of STEM subjects. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a computer scientist, so I don't disparage STEM, but that's not all there is to life, is it? Musical education breeds the musicians of the future, but crucially, it also breeds the audiences of the future. But more than that, learning music develops all children academically. It has huge cognitive benefits which transfer right across the curriculum. Every child deserves the opportunity to learn a musical instrument with free or affordable tuition and instruments. The motion endorses Newham's Every Child a Musician programme, and I welcome the drafted-in amendment about how this could be funded nationwide. Now, my niece plays with the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra, and she told me about a project where the orchestra is a partner in a new non-selective school, Shireland CBSO Academy. The school offers a small number of places to students with exceptional musical ability, but that's set alongside an enriched musical experience for all the pupils, whatever their background. However, these two excellent initiatives are not going to transform the lives of children across the country on their own. It needs political will. A political will to see beyond a narrow curriculum driven only by the economic needs of the country. A political will to harness the impact of music education on the broader cognitive development of children.
Mary.
So please support this motion and please support the future of music in all our lives.
Could I ask Christopher Johnson from Solihull and Meriden to stand by, and Brandon Massey from Reading, who will be speaking to remove lines 20 and 73.
Good afternoon, Conference. I'll start by thanking Charlie for introducing this motion. It is a very good motion overall. I'm particularly from someone who grew up having subsidised music lessons. I appreciate the calls for more music tuition within schools and so forth. So, yes, the separate vote. VAT cuts on specific products do not work. This is a position that the party has taken generally, and this is not an argument I'm going to have now, but on this specific issue, to help GMVs, we need to look at the committee report in general and the evidence given to that. The committee report from the DCS committee talked about how promoters avoided GMVs because there's VAT threshold. By going over that threshold, they don't have to be registered for VAT. And therefore, it became uneconomical for them to do that. The previous Conservative government raised that threshold, which is now one of the highest VAT thresholds in the world. So with this, if we want to help GMVs, we want to increase the demand for them. And that demand must come from the fact there is a noticeable price cut to consumers of that product. So in that case, why would we support a tax cut that does not benefit the consumer as well? And are we ready to accept that our policy on other VAT cuts is wrong? Again, this is not a fight I want to bring at the moment on our other policy, but it is something we need to consider if we are going to pass this motion with these lines within this motion. But other than that, yes, please, regardless of whether you vote with me to remove these lines, please back this motion. Thank you.
Could I ask Lawrence Warner from Eastleigh to stand by? And can we have Christopher Johnson to speak for retaining the lines 20 and 73?
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Conference. About a year ago, I stood on this stage, well, not this stage, one in Bournemouth, but still, and told you that I was about to start a PhD in music. Well, Conference, I'm now a year into that PhD, so it was a great pleasure to speak on this motion about rejuvenating the musical scene in this country. Conference, as the young Liberals among you can tell you, I'm a huge fan of the Proms, whose 2024 season, which included not only classical music but also live performances by Sam Smith and Florence and the Machine, ended on Saturday night. Sir Henry Wood's founding ethos for the festival was that it should deliver the best possible music to the widest possible audience. To this end, the festival is incredibly cheap to attend, with standing tickets only £8, often some of the best positions in the Royal Albert Hall. I know that's a refreshing number after the price of the Eras tour and the new Oasis concerts, isn't it? This is not an advert for the Proms, but to point out that there do remain forces in the UK that seek to disperse music and musical education at affordable prices. However, these are fast disappearing, and the fact something like the Proms could only be produced by something like the BBC is telling. Of course, many of these increasing prices are on account of ticket touts, and so I support the amendment to resolve this issue and open access to live music for all. If only our government could do the same as the Proms and subsidise tickets and education. As it stands, there is massive inequality between the state sector and the private sector when it comes to music education, with those in private schools much more likely to be able to access music education. This needs fixing, and this is what I think this motion aims to do. Our future musicians, composers and researchers, after all, have to be imbued with a love and understanding of music at an early age, or else, without wishing to sound too much like Milton Babbitt, music will come to a halt. I also want to address the separate vote. The main argument seems to be that rather than reducing ticket costs for customers, lowering VAT would merely increase profits for grassroots music venues. Personally, I would consider either of these outcomes to be positive. On the one hand, prices come down for consumers. On the other, grassroots music venues are allowed to thrive. Grassroots music venues are often the space in which artists perform for the first time, and thus the lifeblood of future music. In addition, a significant number of grassroots music venues are charities, meaning there is even more direct link between these and how they benefit music, because the money goes back into the community. In conclusion, this is a matter very close to my heart, and I would wholeheartedly endorse this motion's approach to resolve it. We need to secure the future of music, and to do so we need to, in part, make music education and live music more accessible. Please vote for the motion and the amendment and to retain the lines. Thank you.
To ask Councillor Jill Mosley from Forester Dean to stand by. And can I ask Lawrence Warner to speak?
Testing, 1, 2. Hello, Brighton. Wrong venue. I am Lawrence Warner from Eastleigh, and though I was only shortlisted to be our town's artist in residence this month, I think I speak on behalf of all my fellow recording artists when I say that when it comes to a motion with more money for music, we're for it. Yeah. But I just want to share some things I've learned from my 4 years making records as to how we can make sure this money gets best spent when we come to interpret the motion. So firstly, music education. I was lucky to have my parents pay for me to learn the saxophone all through the grades, but I was also got on the final year of the government-funded Mass Records program in London. And I've got to tell you, of those two things, the one that gave me the vocal to have a voice and put me in contact with other artists to start making records was much more useful. And although I'm sure Charlie's competitor MP in St Albans would love every child in Britain blowing the red flag high on the bassoon, I think we might be better off putting into children's hands a microphone, a MIDI keyboard, and some digital music production software. Thank you, yeah. Thanks. I mean, look, rap and electronic dance music are over half of the music that charted last year. And I believe these are democratic genres that can be made with very little funding. So I think 50 quid for a keyboard, 100 quid for a mic, 200 quid for an Apple Education pack would make this money go a long way when it comes to interpreting this motion. Secondly, where this motion is on stronger ground already is in regards to live music, because there's sustainable revenue from playing live even in the age of AI. And that's where my career myself is going. I'm now working on a piece of live musical theatre. And this is really echoed by this year's Mercury winners. English Teacher were the first artist for 8 years outside of London, and they thanked their grassroots venues in Leeds for helping to make their first record. And you know, Eastleigh, my town, didn't actually have live music venues, so they couldn't run my proposed program of live music. So I really appreciate the focus on grassroots. And I hope that in the future we can have a motion just on making digital streaming resilient to AI. But for now, let's pass this motion that's going to get artists making tracks and get them playing it at their local venue. So thanks for letting me speak for the first time. I thought I'd just leave you with a little rhyme. Thank you very much.
As no one spoke against the amendment, I will not be calling Nick DaCosta to come and submit the amendment, but I will be asking Jamie Stone, our MP for the Highlands, to come and summarise the motion. So, over to yourself.
Thank you. Conference. As a long-time attender, this at last is the occasion to be a first-time speaker. Thank you. I have been a music teacher in the classroom for my entire professional life. I've retired now. And I want to tell you that music can make a very real difference to a child's experience. Music can build, yes, to technical skills, and yes, can be a means of emotional expression. But it can also provide a wonderful channel for confidence building and for improving and refining social skills. My experience in the 3 inner-city comprehensive schools where I worked as head of department and where I ran bands, choirs and supported musical productions, as well as providing classroom music and reports for over 500 pupils a week up to GCSE and A-level, proved this to me without doubt. One in Tower Hamlets took part in Sheila Nelson's Tower Hamlets project. And that was a precursor, I think, to the Newham project mentioned in this motion. There was very generous funding and provision then, and it's clearly missing now. On a career break to have a baby, I took part and later led kinder music or toddler music sessions, and the smiles that emerged from those small voices gradually joining in was a joy to behold in itself. Never underestimate the power of music at every stage in a child or young person's education. Please support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill, and congratulations. Could I now call Jamie Stone, MP for the Highlands, to come and submit the motion? Thank you.
Conference. What a fantastic debate. Thank you so very much. You know, we're spoiled in the UK with such a rich cultural heritage, and a huge part of that, as speaker after speaker has emphasised, is music. It's an essential part of our society, it's an essential part of our life, and we should make it our great ambition to protect it. Now, to touch the amendment, we've seen how the Oasis reunion, a significant cultural moment in our country, was turned into cash cows by greedy promoters and ticketing websites. This should have been a moment that brought the country together, and instead it divided and exploited people. A disgrace. That's why the amendment to tackle ticket touts and protect music fans is so... Can you whistle anything? He said, yeah, I can, mate. I said, whistle me...